Blessed love and peace. All things in praise of the Most High. Elohim, known by many names and beyond all names. Rastafari, all our relations. Blessed love and peace. So, I was just about to do some work, and it's been a minute, probably months, since I do any kind of recording. Actually, specifically, yeah, it's been about 3 months. So, one of the intentions behind that is because to maintain or to minimize the amount of imposition, or don't sweat the cuff links. The imposition on the data stores. We I mentioned before, somewhere, somehow, some way, of being informed of a phenomena in world civilization at this moment. That phenomena is cities being built, constructed, and those cities, small towns, essentially, being just a facility of storing the data that is placed upon the internet. And the way these cities are being established at the moment, as we are told, informed, is that it's in small town places, particularly within the United States, that just grab some land and then put up these towers of whatever. My acumen of IT is comparatively modest, but that's the information that's provided. So recognizing that it's not just a matter of recording these things and being able to have enough bandwidth and um, GBs, MBs, or whatever on our hard drives or whatever to be able to upload it, and it's beyond upload time and limits for monthly memberships or whatever. Like, particularly when we have a utilize non-monetary services like YouTube, and additionally we're able to do these things without particular cost and without particular limit. It still accumulates. There's a cost, and to be mindful about that. And it doesn't seem like it's like a severe humanitarian kind of crisis in terms of the construction of these sites, but like there's further communication of the anticipation of where this leads in the next 10 to 20 years. And so it's beneficial to be further mindful of what we record, what type of strain we place upon the cyber infrastructure. Um, and that's just in a very direct physical manifestation sense. But then, I mean, we talk about AI and social media, and oh man, there's so much, but that's not even the point of what I'm sharing at the moment. So, but anyways, that's one of the reasons why we're being further mindful of what we record, what we post at this point. Um, Serious through the years, I say, oh, this is it. No, no, I'm doing this no further. Tired of it, and they keep pulling me back in. So, anyways, that's one of the rationales for the circumstance in the past few months. Also, I'm older. I'm still working on getting married and all that other things. So these are priorities, and the internet provides a lot of introductions. However, in terms of like closing deals and such, particularly concerning relationships and otherwise, we don't live, most of us presumably, in the cybersphere. We need places to stay, physicality, and that includes relationship as well. So, as many things, the amazing, beautiful things we can do through the internet, seeing visions from across the globe at this time in actual time, we still need that, the basics of um, bricks and clay. All right. So, here we go into the pauses. Something specific. The particular thing is about body, mind, heart, and spirit. But before that, there's something else. Oh, and here the camera goes again. Um, that's something that immediately precipitates this joint. Um, it's 9:21 hours. We're still on the 24-hour clock. It's 2400, 2100, I should say. Um, so it's still comparatively early. It's not the middle of the night. So that's beneficial, at least not yet. It's not the middle of the night yet. Um, Something that is shared recently that seems appropriate to share here. Mm. Oh, okay. Ah, okay. Yeah, all right. So this one is actually, I don't mean to do that light effect thing. Um, the first thing is actually not the major thing, but for whatever reason, it's what precipitates me actually pressing record here. I think we've got plenty of data because we just do some recent. Oh yeah, okay. Um, so this first joint, it may be somewhat difficult. Um, it is shared in a very anthropological. That's anthropological is like a Western term of saying like a compassionate distance, meaning like without intending or trying to subliminally impose biases or whatever else, but just looking at it from a distance and observing it, recognizing the whole time we're still very much enveloped in it. But I'm just gonna say it plain, simple. And if there's any necessity in my conscience of providing any kind of like healing immediately, whatever, God willing, I do that at that time. So, but at the moment, just say it. Oh, I'm thinking about a lot of things to share at this moment. Now that I'm doing this, and I have to like filter actual time simultaneously, like what to share, what not to share. But there's a lot of significant things. So, but there's two that I'm focusing on at this moment. There's a third one that's emerging as I'm speaking. And this is very much, I'm recording this, I'm offline, supposedly. Um, However, we know there's a symbiotic kind of thing with this joint. So there is, and the symbiotic nature of it is also telepathic. It's the nature of life, but it's accentuated through the experience of the internet, so that it's not just a matter of relying upon the telepathic communication in and of itself when we experience that, but then we can rationalize it as a temporal phenomena as well. Um, Temporal, that's semi-applicable. However, all right, two things. A third thing emerges that seems relevant to share. So let's God willing do the two things. Inshallah b'zat Hashem. God willing. Let's do the two things, and then a third, we'll see about that. So, the first joint, again, here it is. When we talk about world civilization, when we talk about the ethnicities, all the religiosities, and additionally, here's a consideration. With love and peace to all, always continually, beauty abounds. The consideration is that, the guidance is that black culture on the earth, not just the United States, not just English speakers, black culture on this earth will always be on the bottom, and white culture will always be at the top. That's not necessarily better or worse in either direction, but just understand the nature of it. Black culture will always be at the bottom. Always. That's the nature of it. And what do we mean by at the bottom? It's always going to be the most real, the most authentic, the one that you experience like the most. As world civilization continues to evolve, as Western European imperialism erodes and Eastern Asian imperialism ascends, and there's a balance and a confluence accordingly. Amidst all of this, black culture continually at the bottom, white culture continually at the top. Black culture, you could feel it. It's realist. It's the most tangible. The darker the berry, the deeper the roots. Culture. That type of healing culture, medicinal culture. Right there. I say that phrase. I feel the vibration, the energy, the positivity, the healing, just by revealing those truths. The realest, the most authentic, the culture that the youth naturally gravitates to, because it is the realest, the most authentic, the one that speaks truth the most to the largest collective of kinfolk. Black culture. White culture is out there. It's out there, for better and for worse. It's out in the stars. It's out in the sky. It's out beyond the atmosphere. Working and discovering new ideas, new expressions, the complicated, sophisticated mathematics, and additionally that inspires, but that also afflicts and otherwise. And black culture, same thing, for better and for worse. It's just the nature of it. The clouds and the earth. And the continual nature of the earth as civilization continues on this path of evolution and ebbs and flows and adjustments, is that people are going to continually migrate in both directions. People are going to love black culture continually, and people are going to hate black culture continually. People are going to love white culture and people are going to hate white culture continually. It's going to continue. And then there's obviously the whole spectrum in between. And then people would just find their lane. People find their homeostasis. Naturally, all these cultures come from a natural experience, a relationship with the elements, with the seasons. And additionally, somebody might be born from a black heritage lineage, quote unquote African. Black is not just limited to Africa, to acknowledge that. Look, just the phenotypically, you can see it all around the world. Same thing with white. So somebody might be born in that lineage. That's all their parents are for how many generations. But at the same time, particularly where one is raised, how one is raised, a person might be born in one set and then find home and truth and peace and purpose in another experience. The video is not showing my hand gestures all the way, but it's all the video's fault. So it's actually all my fault, just to be clear and honest about that for the record. Anyway, so that's the notion of black culture, white culture. And there's so much that fits within that context and that spectrum in terms of understanding life, understanding each other, understanding oneself, understanding path, and otherwise. We can stop it right there. There's further considerations with that, but it may be beneficial to stop it right there, particularly for the sake of time as well. Dare we go into the second joint already? That soon? What? I guess so. Yeah, here we go. Second joint. There's so much further to be said about black and white as well. I'm tempting the excursion. But I'll just say there's a whole lot further to share about that, and things I have yet to share specifically, explicitly. But we'll leave it at that for the moment because that seems decent. 13 minutes, beautiful. Get into the second joint. All right. Okay. Here we go. This one is a little bit different, and it's also there's some grist. There's some there's some digging in this one. So, and it's about livity. It's about relationship, man and woman, husband and wife, perfect balance, and a path of honesty into that experience, as best as I can relate. So first, helpful to have some context, a foundation of concepts, conceptual thinking. So what we do in that respect is, I guess I'll be comprehensive in saying that, foundation of concepts. In our path, in our work with Asona Ashram, Sangha Yosef Rastafari, take a sip. Prayers and blessings have already been recited for this. Sangha Yosef Rastafari, Son Ashram Sangha Yosef Rastafari. We, the service we provide for the earth, for the universe, is a knowledge, a self-knowledge, knowledge of self, with emphasis on a literacy of world civilization, learning about history, geography, cultures, beliefs, teachers of the world, to be able to further proficiently interact with each other. That's what we share, that's what we provide. And we have a distinct learning methodology for that. That's different than what kinfolk today will get at any university or otherwise. We can claim it to be further honest or whatever else, but that's obviously subjective, comparatively so, and that's very immodest. What we can share with a certain amount of further uh, credibility or generally recognized authenticity is that it's less imperial than what is the standard curriculum at a university and the obligation at universities. So basically, it's the foundation of it is knowledge of self, discipline of self, and love of self. Knowledge of self is recognition of the divine spirit of the Most High God within each of us, and knowing God by different names in different ways according to different traditions. But the Spirit exists within each of us, all of us, and knowing that, but then what that actually means in a day-to-day life. That's knowledge of self. Discipline of self is our behavior, cultivating that spirit, that relationship with the spirit within ourselves through healthy living, and healthy interaction and otherwise. That's the discipline of living by ethics, and honoring the relationship that we have with life and with God, and purpose in life. The third one is love of self, is where all of that positivity, and the dealing with the negativity, because it's the yin and the yang, the balance amidst the yin and the yang. All of that is how we share it with others. That's love of self. It's not a matter of loving ourselves. It's how we share the knowledge of ourself, the knowledge of self with others. That's what the love of self is. So those are the three things as foundation, and then the way we teach, what we actually teach, in terms of curriculum. Rivers, languages, and calendars. Rivers are our relationship with land, where we come from, and that distinguishes a people from other peoples, what land you come from. So that's the rivers. And there's so much with the rivers. It's so healing, it's so beautiful and miraculous. Rivers. Just having a literacy of one's own rivers, but then also the general rivers of the world. That's the first part of it. Second part is languages. Language has so much to do with who we are, what we know, what we understand about life, and it is very beneficial to have a continual lineage of and literacy of the languages of our ancestors within ourselves. Again, for strength of knowledge of self and a strength of relationship with others, our family, clan, friends, society, and otherwise. So when we do our studies, to be able to study as close to the language of our ancestors, prophets, and sages as possible. Language. So as land distinguishes people from each other based upon geography and where people are from, languages distinguish culture amongst peoples. People can be from the same land vicinity, but speak different languages, and those languages define the relationships, and a lot of the politics and socializing and otherwise. So land or rivers distinguish people amongst peoples. Languages distinguish culture amongst peoples. And then the third element, calendars, though, that's the mathematics. That's the celestial mathematics. That's the measurement that our ancestors complete through thousands of years from the different parts of the world about the movement of the elements of this universe, the Earth, on its rotation of its axis, axis, 24 hours in a day, as we understand, and then the moon, around 29.5 days in the cycle of the moon, 365 thereabout days of the Earth around the Soleil. And then where the seasons emerge along these movements, when there is the um, winter, spring, summer, and autumn, when there is the rain season, when there is the dry season, and then when we can expect the harvest to arrive, what preparations to make for the harvest, and to prepare, sow the seeds, and then reap the crops. And additionally, there are rituals, there are ceremonies, there are stories and songs that are sung and performed and shared for generations along these lines, and the calendars guide us in that. So, um, where the land distinguishes people amongst peoples, language distinguishes culture amongst peoples, the calendars establish and distinguish a civilization amongst the many different cultures, because it takes a lot of study, whether it's Mayan, whether it's Zarathustra, whether it's the many different. There are basically 12 calendars of the world, um, that are prominent within world culture. So within each of these experiences, and there are a number of different and there are variations of these calendars as well. However, it's a very distinguishing phenomenon, because um, there may be many different cultures that have many different ways of doing things. It takes another level of quiet. It takes another level within an entire society to reach a state of calm and quiet, to be able to support people to simply look at the moon and look at the stars. No, you don't need to go out in the field. Nah, you don't need to go out into the battlefield and train for war or whatever else. We want you to go to the school, and we want you to look into the advanced experiences, and study them. And so it's trusted to a comparatively few. But when kinfolk do that, then kinfolk observe things, measure it, and say, "Oh, okay, I've been doing this for a number of years. We've been going around, or presumably some people didn't always think that. Actually, anyway, I mean, without getting into those specifics, we've seen these movements for a number of years. We've gone through the cycle of seasons, observed the movement and the presentation of the stars. Here's some things we've learned, and this occurs here, this occurs there, and so okay, that's beneficial to remember that. Let's keep a record of that. And now we can plan. We can plan. We can store our harvest surplus. We can prepare for the next year. We know when it's going to happen, generally, according to the calendar. And additionally, so the calendar is a very advanced product from a civilization, and it's a distinguishing. Not all cultures, not all. When we hear all the wars and all the great kings and everybody else, not all of them established calendars, and so it's a distinguishing accomplishment or achievement from a civilization to establish a calendar. And when that is done, that's huge. That is so influential for generations and even thousands of years. So calendars distinguish um, cultures, or distinguishes a civilization amongst cultures. So those are the three things we say. We look at those. We look at the calendars from around the world. We look at what's going on, the observances within each of the calendars. I described some of the basic components within many of the calendars. There's generally a time of recognizing when the harvest is beginning, when to sow the seeds. There's a time of gathering. There's a time of atonement, and making amends for everything that was done up to that point in the previous year, in terms of trying to get what one can for during the warmer growing season. So the rituals are our guidance, and the calendars guide us when to have those rituals. Um, and that's part of what we study, those three things: rivers, languages, and calendars. So we have knowledge of self, discipline of self, love of self. Then we have what the actual knowledge is, which is the information, which is rivers, languages, and calendars. But wait, there's more. There's further, and that is the third part of it, which is um, songs, stories, rituals, and ethics. And that particularly, predominantly, is shared from Kongzi. Kongzi. My pronunciation is still working, meaning very modest but still learning. But Confucius, known in Western parlance, emphasizes these elements in terms of study and literacy for scholars, for the learned men. The gentleman, the can say even as Mengzi says, the superior man. You could say the Rastaman, Anyways, for those who are committed to a life of devoted to righteousness, um, songs, stories, rituals, and ethics. Songs lift our spirit, help memorization, tell us about the ways of the ancients, and relate with others. So songs are so important. It's not just culture. It's not just like entertainment. It's serious. So songs so foundational, and stories similarly. Stories have their give the same kind of information with the songs, but where songs are easier to remember and easier to teach children and motivate and get the attention of children, stories provide further detail and further narratives that explain the basic elements that are addressed within the stories. And so the two go hand in hand with each other. The rituals are the times, as I mentioned before, with calendars during the course of every year where we gather together, whether it's a new moon gathering, a full moon gathering, the harvest, whether it's the equinox, solstice, or otherwise. These are the times we gather together as a community and we share songs and stories. We feast, we scrimp and we save for a time, a few months, a few weeks, or whatever it is, and we look forward to the festival to gather with each other. We prepare for that. It's economic motivation. It's a shared experience socially. It's politics and otherwise. So these are our rituals, and then the ethics are what keep us together. The ethics are the glue. Or let's probably think of another healthier metaphor to share. Um, Ethics are the bond, I'll say. Um, that keep us together as a society. It's what facilitates the harmony and the order within society about how to behave with each other, how to hold each other accountable, and otherwise. So, songs, stories, rituals, and ethics. That's the fourth part. And obviously, there's a lot of further detail that goes into each of these elements. But that's our learning. That's our learning platform, our methodology, in having, in cultivating and sharing, teaching and learning world literacy of world civilization. So what's the point of all that? Haha. Well, we got another one too. How about that? So the third, the next joint is understanding our well-being, our health, and our well-being, and we refer to it as livity, Rastafari. Livity. We have four components: body, mind, heart, and spirit. Um, and those are what we can recognize as what basically comprises of who we are: body, mind, heart, and spirit. Um, Body is the physical. It may be comparatively plain and simple. Mind is all the cognition that we're experiencing. Heart is actually our relationship with others. And it's some of the X factor. And I can explain briefly in a moment. I've shared a lot of this already before. And then the fourth one is spirit, which is basically everything beyond body, mind, and heart, and everything within body, mind, and heart as well. Um, so we have an understanding of like exercises we can do. First of all, it's helpful to emphasize those four components so that when we look at ourselves and we're doing a self assessment, we're doing a self evaluation about how am I doing right now? How am I feeling? What's my health levels? Well, how's my body health doing? Okay, I've gained about 50 pounds in the past few months. Okay, maybe you should work on that. Okay, mental health, how's that doing? Am I stressed? Am I able to concentrate? Is my memorization decent or not? How's my mental health? It's not just emotions. Emotions are included within that, and that's not actually part of the heart per se. Um, it's that's the mind. So that's the mental. All of that factors into it. So, and if we're having challenges with mental, then there are things we can do. We can meditate. We can be quiet for a minute. We can study. We can have a teacher, have therapy, or talk to people, a counselor, or clergy, or otherwise. But there are things that we can do to help our mental health. Um, then with our heart health, again, I'll skip that for a minute because that's the X factor. I'll go to spiritual health. How are we experiencing our existence in terms of, in Western parlance, the lines may be somewhat blurry about where do we draw the line between mind and spirit. If we talk about depression, is that something that's mind, or is that like an existential crisis type of thing? But either way, um, whatever we're experiencing, feeling, or otherwise, spirit has something to do with that. And depending upon our proclivities and otherwise in life, for those of us who are further amenable to that type of language, this consideration, okay, I'm feeling depressed. I'm feeling like um, difficulty in trusting people, trusting life. I'm tired. I'm stressed with, and again, it can be blurry drawing the lines, but spirit is a matter of like the big questions in life, and even the big challenges in life, the purpose of life. Um, Obviously, when there's the death of a loved one, that is something that hits on that spirit level as well. So. And there are exercises, there are things we can do on our own as well as with others to increase our well being of spirit, our healthiness of spirit. Pray, meditate. We can do studies. Again, we can have conversation and reason with others in that particular with that particular intention and otherwise. So, um, I'll return to the heart, which as I said before is the X factor, because each of the other components that I described are generally things that, in terms of healing and well being, we can do on our own. If I'm overweight, whatever, I can walk on my own. I can do calisthenics, and increase my physical well being, generally speaking. In the mind, okay, if I'm feeling sluggish, lethargic, or challenging of concentration, I can read, I can study, I can do quietude on my own, and strengthen the concentration. Get off the media joints, and strengthen the concentration, and sense of calm within the mind. And with the spirit, if I'm feeling experience um, of desolation, and questioning big things in life about purpose, God, others, the warfare and trials and tribulations, suffering, afflictions, warfare, pedophilia, cannibalism, all the nasty things that exist in life. Like, yo, why is this happening? When I need some strength and healthy and nurturing and healing within the spirit experience, there are exercises that we are able to do. Again, prayer, meditation. That depends upon our background and what rings true with us. But there are things that we can do even on our own, to increase our well being in that respect. Now, returning to heart. Heart is something that we cannot do on our own. Heart is the X factor, because heart is our experience of relationship with others, with life, plants, animals, and additionally, but also with other people, family, friends, and otherwise. And it's not just a matter of like being on nice terms and communicating and being pleasant with others. It's a matter of regularly, day in, day out, being attuned with each other's routine. For again, better or worse, better and worse, getting tired of each other. Growing up with siblings or whatever, you get tired of seeing each other, always bickering, whatever. But at the same time, generally getting along, but still frustrating. Yo, that's a very strong level of heart well-being. Interacting with each other, you know each other's schedules, full stop. Daily. You know the schedules better than each other. You know the appointments that kinfolk have. You know when they get out of school. You know the class schedule that kinfolk have when they're in school. You know when the adults get back from work, what their off times. You know the details of the day to day life of kinfolk around you. That's healthy levels of heart well being. When we mature, when we graduate, particularly from preparatory high school, when we get into later stages of life, whether it's university, whether it's work, oftentimes we move out the house, and additionally we live on our own or otherwise. And that experience, at least in the early stages, that experience of being so attuned to somebody else tends to be distanced. We tend to be further. We're discovering at that stage of life, we're discovering about life ourselves and learning things, and it's a whole new world kind of thing. But at the same time, like, it's different in terms of not interacting with somebody day in and day out. Might have a roommate, and that might be something else. But the further we mature, the further we age in life, the further distant we become from others, until and unless we get married, we commit to somebody else, and we have children, and then we begin that family life of regular schedules and otherwise. But many people, uh, including yours truly, have yet to arrive at that experience and that state in life, and so thus it becomes further and further individual. And we may have beneficial relations and rapport with others, but we become further and further isolated. And it's beneficial to recognize that, and to recognize that when we are without that experience of day in, day out, shared routines and interaction, the heart levels are decreasing. Um, and that it's beneficial to recognize, because that's part of our collective well-being. And we may compensate in one or another area. We might get further in our work. We might get further in terms of doing exercises, whatever. May get further into the spiritual path, but that does not equate and substitute the heart experience. That's something that I learned recently, in recent years, because I love everybody. But that love for everybody, that's not heart, that's spirit. I genuinely love everybody, and it's not easy, and it's not a cakewalk, quote unquote. Um, but that's not heart. So, and that's heart is a necessity within life. So it's beneficial to recognize that. And the other element of that, again, being the X factor, is that we cannot do that on ourselves. We cannot do that by ourselves on our own. It requires another person's volition, another person's willingness to share, and to mutually be a part of each other's life. Whether that's a spouse, husband and wife, whether that's family, whether that's friends or a roommate or whomever else. The heart experience requires two. It takes two, one way or the other. And it's something we are unable to do on our own. We can't just say, "Oh, I'm feeling low on my heart levels. I gotta like do something tomorrow, and up that myself." No, it requires somebody else's okay, and interest and motivation. And yeah, that's it in terms of that respect. Well, but when we talk about the heart, we'll get to what the purpose of me sharing this at the moment is. That's all foundational. But when we are aware of this, it's so helpful. And just looking at things in life, and understanding ourselves and otherwise. So, okay, okay, that wasn't the greedy part. I said this is there's some diggy to this. There's some diggy to it. Um, so that wasn't the diggy. That's the foundation, and that's like the healthy, pleasant stuff. But we're gonna get a little bit diggy in this. Diggy, diggy, diggy. Okay, I'm trying to calculate how much we go into this joint. All right, well, we'll roll with that, see how it goes. We're doing decent. Oh, wow. Somehow we went from 13 minutes just a minute ago, which happens to be almost 30 minutes ago. We're at 39, 39. Wow. Okay, well, I did some further background in terms of the foundation of describing, putting body, mind, heart, and spirit in context. Um, well, if we're going to delay it a wee bit, I'll share some other further um, considerations regarding body, mind, heart, and spirit. And I'm not just making this up. This is the result of studies. And I'm not talking about recent research experiment studies. I'm talking about long time ago, revelationary kind of wisdom studies that are shared from the ancients. So the first one I'll share, like where some of this comes from, is db dot Jesus. Gospels, Matthew chapter 5, verse 3, I think it is, the beginning of the Beatitudes. It's actually the Beatitudes. When we look at the Beatitudes, we can see that Jesus is addressing these four distinct experiences of life: body, mind, heart, and spirit. There's a lot just within that particular passage of the Gospels. So much riches. And I abstain from getting into it, a lot of the detail of it, but there's so much richness there. But the basic just is to recognize these four components of life: body, mind, heart, and spirit. And this is actually built from something from the Torah about loving God with all our might, with all our heart, with all our spirit. Something that's recited within Judaism on a daily basis, part of the Shema. So that's much of what this comes from, is body, mind, heart, and spirit. But then we can look at additional elements of the wisdom of the earth, the chakras, and studying the anatomy, the transcendent as well as the physical anatomy of the chakras, and how that also coalesces with the 10 sphirot. Chakras coming from Vedic Desi culture from India, the sphirot also coming from Israel. Again, this is an ancient wisdom that is communicating truth in a very similar and exact same way, but also in nuanced and distinct ways as well. So that all factors into our being, um, and particularly our physical being, but our comprehensive being too. And there's additional elements, but those are some that I share at the moment. I mentioned before Kong Tzu. I guess what I'll throw in also is Wu Lun, the five fundamental relationships of society: husband and wife, parent and child, elder sibling, younger sibling, teacher and student, friend and friend. It's articulated and translated in somewhat nuanced ways than what I just described, but that's our understanding of it. And so when we talk about heart and our relationship with others, these are the foundational types of relationship, and each of these relationships has a specific, or has a certain purpose, and people's roles within these relationships are distinct, and it's beyond just one's own self. This is all filial piety. This is all a matter of recognizing a purpose greater than ourselves, but even just beyond that, it's a matter of a purpose that is in relationship with our forebears, with our parents. And honor our mother and our father, honor our father and mother, far and more. Filial piety, in recognizing that in an existential, individual, kind of transcendent, Henry David Thoreau, um, Ralph Emerson, is it Ralph Waldo Emerson, kind of way. That's a very individualistic, kind of transcendent path and consciousness. That's beautiful, but at the same time, it's somewhat distinct from a filial piety, because one can go dolo style on a spiritual path, and say there's a purpose of serving God, and so it's just between oneself and God, and that there's legitimacy within that. But it's also beneficial to recognize that there's also, in many of our cultures of the world, not just a duty to God, but also a duty to family, to parents, to our ancestors, and honoring that. Within Judaism, those two are intertwined with each other, as it is within a number of different traditions. So, but it's a distinct additional factor other than just a relationship with God, because it includes being reconciled with our parents. And that's so important, because particularly in age of the past few generations of modernity and individualism, there's an intrinsic rebelliousness, there's an intrinsic lack of deference for parents, and otherwise there's a rebelling spirit, a rebellious spirit that separates parent from child very often within industrialized, modern, postmodern society. And so a counterbalance and a healthy balance amidst that individualistic culture, which is also a response and an evolution from the feudal system of Western European society, that very much devalues and degenerate, or not degenerates, but devalues the individual as just being a chattel belonging to somebody else. So there's a purpose that individualism serves for many generations. Anything to excess, though, is imbalanced. So a counterbalance is a return into looking and seeing and practicing this thing of filial piety, where it's not just an existential search of an individual with a transtemporal God. It is also staying in relationship and making decisions in life, even at a young age, that are along those lines and in further attunement with that relationship with family. So instead of doing this travel or doing that study abroad or otherwise, and those are all beautiful things, it's a matter of being further mindful of how this affects family and where the relationship of family progresses amidst these different types of travels, whatever else. Anyways, I'm getting a little bit off topic, whatever, but some insight to share, for particularly for young kinfolk who may be less um, aware or less um, introduced to these types of insight and guidance. So um, let's try to reel this back. Reel, REE. Body, mind, heart, and spirit. Filial piety. Relationship. Recognizing a purpose beyond ourselves. A purpose in life, a purpose with God, a purpose with family. A purpose greater than our personal self. And with that purpose, we have support from life, from God, from family, from beyond ourself. So that's some context. I was sharing some additional insight concerning body, mind, heart, and spirit. I was talking about where it comes from, the Gospels, as I mentioned, the Beatitudes. I was talking about the chakras. I was talking about Sphirot. Included the element of Wulun as well, and there are many different. Throw one other one in there, which is the Gayana Shagoa, the Law of the Great Peace from Haudenosaunee, the Iroquois Confederation, which is actually the precursor and the foundation of the U.S. Constitution, which transforms the world. Every country almost around the world, members of the United Nations, all have a constitution that are predicated upon the U.S. Constitution, and the U.S. Constitution is predicated upon the Gayana Shagoa, the Law of the Great Peace. Benjamin Franklin and others are keen students with the Haudenosaunee during that time. So, and the thing I'm sharing here is, in terms of relationship, is the balance of masculine and feminine, matriarchs and chiefs, how that works. My knowledge of it is very modest. Clans, how clans work. What is clan? What is clan culture? What is clan affiliation? Matrilineal it is in the tradition of Gayana Shagoa and much of native kinfolk and tribes of this land. And the matriarchs play such a significant role, but at the same time, it's not the prominent role that the outsiders will see. What outsiders generally see are the chiefs, the men who are in charge and making and going off into battle, who are making decisions, signing treaties, wampum, and additionally, chiefs, men. That's what people see. What people see less of is that those men are chosen by the matriarchs. The matriarchs decide who those men are. That's strong right there. And the appointments are for life. But if the chief is tripping, matriarch has a prerogative of saying out. That's strong. But in the meanwhile, the matriarchs focus on relationship within the clans, what the needs are within the homes, and do that in a comparatively modest way, but effective and prominent. A person's clan affiliation, regardless of what their tribe is, And additionally, the clan affiliation is the predominant identity factor, and that affiliation is matrilineal. People follow in the clan of one's mother, and that's so healing for this sterile AI society, robotic society, to feel that balance of respect and cooperation and love between man and woman, masculine and feminine. That's one thing that the U.S. Constitution did not include, and that is suffering because of it. So um, we throw that into the mix when we talk about relationship and heart. So um, with that said, here we go into the diggy along that line of man and woman relationship. Here's some things to consider. Um, Men are generally stronger bodily, physically than women. Basically, facts. Some women who are extremely strong than the majority of men on earth. Those are exceptions. Generally speaking, men are physically stronger than women. I think it's difficult for people to argue against that. Now, there's a flip side to that, which is this. At the same time, women are generally stronger mentally than men. I've shared this before. I've shared this in conversations. It's been a while since I've done these joints. I'm uncertain how much I've shared of this before, but that might be less facts in some people's estimation, but it's generally facts as well. So, for those who are able to recognize that and like if, with that, working from that presumption or from that foundation, then we do some further learning, we do some further observation and study. And here's where we go with this. We're getting to the digging now. Recognizing that men are generally physically stronger than women. It is often That is often the way that when men are being predatory, um, that men overpower women through physical application. Not advocating that, obviously, but just thus a man uses his advantage, competitive advantage in that respect. Um, that's nothing new. That's old news. But what's beneficial to recognize is, again, on the flip side, the flip of that coin is how women overpower men through the mental strength, um, and how that factors into conditions of today. There's a lot to be said about contemporary experience and the relationship between men and women. I'm going to endeavor to be very comparatively focused and just concentrate in the purpose of what I have to share for the moment. Um, I, Hmm. Hmm. Oh, D. Okay. Ah. Okay. The diggy gets to another level. Hmm. Which is what I'm thinking about right now, but it's too much of a leap to go right to that. And so I'm trying to remember the steps that make it further simple to see that next level of the digging. Because if you just do diggy, if a person just does diggy on its own from zero to that, it looks like what? So it helps to see the steps that gets to that. And so I'm having some challenge in terms of remembering the steps of getting to that. Meanwhile, as I'm recollecting that, I'm reminded of another step that's a little bit like halfway to the next level digging, which in itself is a considerable step, but it may be still accessible for the moment's purposes. So I'll delve into that to that somewhat step. I wasn't specifically intending, but it's actually relate. It's very much part of this. So here's where we go with that. Okay, okay. This is Diggy too. This is legit Diggy too. Um, and this is what it is. I'm man ho. What is a man ho? With all due respect to all people, to all kinfolk, of all experiences and afflictions and otherwise, I'm just going to use some very, very street terms to speak very plainly about this experience. And I mean this without disrespect, but we're talking about some nasty stuff, and it's not a matter of like sugarcoating it or whatever, just speaking to it to be able to understand and work through it and heal from it. And so I don't use the B word and I don't use the N word because there's little constructive nature to it. Don't do that. Um, but I am going to say ho in this respect because that's what I'm referring to. That's the behavior that I'm referring to. If you talk about a B, you're talking about a dog. Literally, that's what that is. If you're talking about an N, as the coup says, what the fuck is that? And even I say the word F right there, but that's not derogatory towards any particular individual, specific group um, of being. It's a behavior. So, anyways, I'm saying ho, but I'm saying it purposefully. So I'm just being emphasized that. And I mean, I'm saying it with due respect. And I'm saying it whilst being afflicted within these conditions as well. So that's the mindfulness that we articulate this from which we articulate this. Ho. If we look at what the definition or the general understanding of a hoe is a woman who has sexual intercourse and sexual intimacies with numerous men without having a particular kind of commitment or otherwise. And men tend to, on one hand, look down upon hoes because, generally speaking, it's a woman who is of loose living, of loose morals, of loose. She's not very loyal or not seen as very loyal, and so man is unwilling to commit himself and raise children with her because like just gonna get so much disrespect from everybody else because she's going out and having intimacies with all these other men. So what self-respecting man is going to commit himself to her knowing that she's having that type of interaction with other men? That's part of the understanding of what a hoe is, and part of the challenges of that experience. That's on one hand, but at the same time, men will be first in line to have their way with a hoe if she's attractive and otherwise, but just very quiet and low key on the QT type of thing. So it's hypocrisy on men's part. Again, going to Jesus, the Gospel of John, when the woman who was accused of adultery is forgiven when Jesus says, "Let he who is without sin cast the first stone." So, anyways, ho. adulterous. It's different from a whore. People use the word whore to describe hoes often, but a whore technically is a woman who gets paid to do that. A hoe just has sex with men, either for attention, for support, for food, or something, but doesn't necessarily mean she's getting paid for it. A prostitute, a whore, that's a woman who gets paid for it. So, just in terms of definition. So, I've described with certain specificity what is understood as a hoe, what we're talking about in that respect. And that's all specifically applied to women because when men behave in that exact same way, when a man goes out and has sex with a lot of other women, to this day, for thousands of years, he's understood as not even just a pimp, a Mac, because a pimp is, again, similar with whore, although he's often referred to as a pimp. In a comparatively positive and revering way, which is itself just endemic of the unhealthiness. But and I am not immune from that criticism, but it's the facts. A man who has sex with many women is not necessarily a pimp. Some people may refer to him as a Mac. Either way, very often, by and large, amongst common kinfolk, it is seen as a positive thing. He's influential. He has game. He knows how to talk with women. He has money. He has his way. So he's seen as like a viable prospect in terms of partnership, in terms of business, entrepreneurship, or whatever else. Excuse me, because he knows how to talk with women. He knows how to be influential. He knows how to get his way. So a lot of kinfolk look for a dude like that to be on their team. Wait a minute, hold up. He's doing the same thing the woman is doing. Why do kinfolk go to him? But for the woman, she's looked at as a pariah. It's the hypocrisy of life, but it's also a matter of understanding the distinction, the differentiation of the nature of man and woman, and the implications of what that behavior imposes upon the community, society, and the next generation of progeny, of children within society. Um, so, all right, if a man behaves like the behavior of a female hoe, then what is a man hoe? There has to be some kind of yin and yang. If a woman who behaves in a certain way is referred to a hoe, then what's the equivalent of a man? What is a man hoe? What does it mean to be a man hoe? People don't even say that word too tough, but there has to be some kind of phenomena. What would that be? In what ways is a man looked upon with the disparaging criticism of society in the way that society looks at a woman? What is that? What is a man hoe? So, okay, if it's not him having sex with a lot of women, because that's revered, he's a champion in many people's eyes in that respect. Um, if that's not what a man hoe is, then what is a man hoe? Is it a wanker? A wanker is a person, generally a man, who practices and commits masturbation. And so, okay, that's a loser. He can't get women, this, that, and the other. But is that necessarily a man hoe? Because, like, he might be self-afflicting and like playing himself and just a loser. But how is that he doesn't seem like he's being manipulated or used like what can be visibly seen from a woman who's being a hoe. So that doesn't necessarily seem to exactly equate, maybe per se. Is it somebody who is just like that the rich kid at school who just gets used by everybody else because he pays for everything? And every time the friends go out or whatever, he pays for the food, he pays for the movies, he pays for this and the other. So he's just being used up for his money. That's the idea about a hoe, a woman who's being a hoe, that she's just being used. Men are just using her for her body, for sexual gratification, and once they get what they want, they bounce. So in what ways do women use up a man? Just get what they want from a man, and then bounce, and just leave, and that man's just disrespected or whatever else. How does a man get used up in that respect? Is it his money? Is it his status? Is it him if he has money? Is it just a matter of that? Just like, okay, he's born into riches, and so people just like invite him to parties or whatever and make him pay for everything, or just invite him to pay for everything, and so he's just being used by his friends or whatever else. Is that a type of man hoe? Maybe. Is it somebody who has status within society, whether it's like the son of a clergy, or whether it's the son of a community leader, a chief, even, with all due respect, but somebody who has status, and who has influence because of that status within the community, and then others use that person to like do game or whatever on others, and that status eventually deteriorates to the point of being worth very little. Um, just what does a man have that can be used up by others in a way that people look at a woman using herself through sexual intimacy with many men? What is that? All right. So I think I'm not necessarily doing the most effective job in articulating question, but I think the gist of it is there. So okay, so how do we answer that? What is that? What is a manhood? So here's the answer that is recently shared and that I share here. A manho is a man, very simply, a man who thinks about having sex with many women. And that's it. Huh? What? All that for that? Yes. That's it. A manho is a man who thinks, who just thinks, lusts even, within the thought of having sexual intimacy with numerous women. How is that a manho? Understand what a man is. Men use a female hoe for her body to get sexual gratification through intimacy with her body. So on the flip side, and again, understanding the nature, the differentiation between man and woman, the strengths and the weaknesses, body and mind particularly. So when men use a woman, the body of a woman, for sexual gratification, selfish sexual gratification, and then discard the body, don't care, whatever, don't talk to me, blah. That's the violation. That's the usury, so to speak, for that term, of a man towards a woman hoe. So the flip side that is shared is that when a woman uses a man's mind for gratification, for her own purposes and own selfishness, and then discards that man, that's a manho. It's a violation of the man's mind rather than his body, because that is the weakness of the man, and that is also the richness of the man. So it's a matter of recognizing, understanding, observing, understanding, and recognizing the different nature of man and woman, the different strengths and proclivities and weaknesses and vulnerabilities, and how each one is utilized, how each one not is utilized, is used, is abused. Men are generally physically stronger than women. And the way in which when men have the occasion of abusing women, it is generally physically, because that is the general physical, or that is the general advantage and strength that men have over women, generally speaking. Women are generally mentally stronger than men. When women have the occasion of abusing and violating men, it is generally mentally, because that is the strength that women generally have over men. Do we see that as basic facts? And when we see that as basic facts, that when men have the occasion of abusing women, it is generally physically, not exclusively, but generally physically. when women have the occasion of abusing and violating men, it is generally mentally. See that? So, when men have the occasion of exploiting women, intentionally, continually exploiting women, it is generally through a woman's body. And when women have the occasion of exploiting men continually, it is generally through the man's mind. When a woman gives up her body to the exploitation of many men, she is referred to as a hoe. When a man gives up his mind to the exploitation of many women, that is a man-hoe. How does a man give up his mind, acquiesce his mind to the exploitation of many women? How does that happen? It's not just necessarily through sexual lusting after women, particularly nowadays. It's cultivated at an early age of well, we get into mother issues and feminine authority figures, teachers, and otherwise, where men are conditioned to be pleasing towards women, and women are further, again, in today's age, women are generally less committed within traditional family and focusing on their own sons or otherwise, and are increasingly focused as teacher, as corporate, whatever, are increasingly focused on the behavior of men outside of one's own family. And in focusing on the behavior of men outside of one's own family, that generally also involves guiding or manipulating the behavior of other men. And again, from young ages. So that's getting a little bit complex. But that's the basic gist of it. A man-hoe is a man who gives up his mind to the exploitation of many women. And very often it is through the sexual suggestion of women. All right. Before I get into that, it's beneficial to recognize, to acknowledge this, to acknowledge the abuse. And again, I'll say how the things that men have done to women for a long time and within the past century, the past few generations, in the past day are nasty, atrocious, heinous. And there's so much to do to secure the well-being of our women, our men, the women in our lives, mothers, sisters, daughters, nieces, aunties, grandmas, granddaughters, all of the women in our lives, cousins. There's so much that men are called to do to optimally provide and comfort and secure the women in our lives. So that said, at the same time, it's beneficial to recognize how much abuse women impose upon men, particularly in this past century, the past few generations, and in this past day. And that affliction is there's the physicality of it, but it's so much the mental. It's so much the mental, and it's so much under the radar. It's so much off the radar, but it's so, won't say that it begins with women, but the concern is where it goes and how it leads to, how just it multiplies and amplifies the dis-ease within society. And why it's so important to recognize, because it's only through recognizing this that we are effective in healing. We have to address it in order to heal. That's the purpose of sharing this. So we talk about the physical abuses of men towards women, terrible, nasty atrocities. A woman living with an abusive husband, not knowing what that evening is going to be, if he's drinking or whatever else, how much police work in society, in cities, in urban areas, is responding to domestic violence and domestic abuse that does not get solved. They just get called when it becomes too much, but the woman is too fearful, too dependent. That's the standard trope maybe a few decades ago. The system has changed somewhat, so now there's further motivations for the man to get excluded, whatever else, but still, that's nasty experience. So we're not belittling that. We're not detracting from the suffering that kinfolk are experiencing, or we're not overlooking that. But at the same time, it's necessary to recognize how much women are abusing men today, how pervasive the abuse is that women are committing against men. So what am I talking about? Thirst trapping, immodesty. These are all ways of, it's not just a matter of women expressing themselves, women expressing themselves. It's not just a matter of getting attention. It's a predatoriness. It is the equivalent. It is mental molestation. That's what it is, plain and simple. When a woman is tempting a man, in particularly without the intention of marriage and committing with him for the rest of life, that is mental molestation. That is a violation. That is a woman violating the mind of a man. Now, a man has to answer for himself, and it's up to a man to guard his modesty and deal with the things that he encounters on a daily basis. It's not shirking that responsibility, but to understand and recognize the abuse, the pervasive, enormous abuse that women are imposing upon men, particularly through the internet. Not taking any onus or responsibility on the part of men, but acknowledging the responsibility of women who are citizens, who are deciding sentient beings within democratic societies, and additionally, accountability and responsibility for the abuses, and to acknowledge it as abuse. It's not expression. It's not personal expression. It's not just a woman with daddy issues trying to get attention. It is a predatoriness, and it is the equivalent. It is the equivalent of a man groping a woman. A man groping a woman is a violation of her physical integrity. A woman showing her bosom and introducing salacious thoughts to a man's mind, that is an abuse. That is a violation. That is a molestation of his mind. It's further difficult to call it out, to police it, and otherwise, but at the very least to recognize that it is a violation, it is molestation, and to take it seriously, because when it's not taken seriously, as we've seen for many generations to this day, when it's not taken seriously, it becomes normalized and it becomes pervasive. And the effects of it, the negative effects of it, men's minds deteriorate. Concentration, the enlightened nature, and additionally, stupid. Men get stupid. That's the nature of it. And it's men are responsible. Men have to take the blame, and additionally, but it's important for men and women to understand and recognize and understand what is actually happening, what it is. The abuse, the violation, the molestation. It's no hate. It's just facts. And it's facts that are shared with the purpose and intention of healing. Being honest about it. So, all right, we've been at this for an hour. We're supposed to do something else right now. So, um, that's the basic gist. Again, that was the intermediate. That was the middle step. Um, I guess I'll just throw this one out here. I'll go to the next leap to the next level and put this out there just for it to be on the record or whatever else. And this we can reason about this. We can talk about this and whatever else. Let's be honest about it. And For us to be honest, for us to be comfortable in being honest about it, we gotta. There's a lot of things that we gotta call about on our own personal behavior, and additionally, and come to terms with, even if we have yet to fully heal or improve our ways or whatever else, at least in to respond and to have a conversation about this. Let's just at least be honest. Um, Otherwise, it's just people taking shots at each other, um, and trying to defend a position that people know is compromised. So um, let's just be honest about it. Um, Now, one thing to go further on that middle joint, about a manho, is to recognize like where that leads, like what happens when a man thinks about a woman in such a way, thinks about women in such a way. His focus, his concentration deteriorates. Um, when he expends himself physically, through masturbation, through promiscuity or otherwise, through having sex with many women. A man who has sex with many women is thinking about having sex with many women. So he is actually a man hoe too. And he might seem very prominent at that moment, but women are sinking their claws or their hooks into that man, and using him up for whatever he is deemed as being valuable. But there's an eventuality of him being used up, and tossed. And cats don't have much of a sympathy for him because never liked him to begin with, never cared about him, but just envied him, and what they thought or perceived as his prowess or whatever else. But catch him in 5 years, catch him in 10 years. Um, it's not a pretty situation. So so the when where does that go when a woman molests a man? In the mental, it doesn't just end with the mental. Again, he expends himself, his seed, again through masturbation, promiscuity, or whatever. He expends himself. He emits his life force. Every time a man emits his life force, it may be orgasmic. He might experience a lot of pleasure with that. It's death too. He is dying. He is expending his life force. His seed is his physical path of infinity. His seed is not just a metaphor. His seed is a path for future generations. There's so much energy, there's so much power that exists within that. It's too much for many men to contain. An elephant in must is the same thing. It's tremendous. But when a man expends it, and expends a lot of it regularly or otherwise excessively, his energy levels are extremely depleted. His mental levels are extremely depleted. He goes through a considerable amount of suffering, um, comprehensively, body, mind, heart, and spirit, um, from that mental molestation of a woman. And it's not blaming a woman for that. It's understanding just the cause and effect. It's for a man to recognize that and take responsibility for that, but it's also for the woman to know it, to be mindful of what she's doing, and the consequences of her actions, because she's answerable to that too. Um, so the mental molestation that women commit against men has further consequences, further comprehensive consequences beyond just the mental. Um, it influences, it affects him, how, what a man's outlook on life, a man's perception of relationship, family, society, and otherwise. Many men talk about, particularly when being enveloped in the experience of pornography, many men talk about like it's a different world, like it's a different realm, and it's difficult to relate in just regular conversations or whatever within society, um, because it's a different realm. Literally, it's a different realm, and it significantly negatively affects affects a man's perspective concerning women, trust within women, because, well, without getting into a lot of the details or whatever, but just recognizing that the effects of women's mental molestation of men is multifold and comprehensive beyond just the mental. Just like when a man abuses a woman physically, there are comprehensive, multifold consequences and effects of that, body, mind, heart, and spirit. Same thing. And the intention or the point here is not to equate a woman's mental abuse towards a man with a man's physical abuse towards a woman. We can generally recognize there's a further priority in minimizing a man's physical abuse towards a woman. So the point is not to equate the two, but the point is to recognize how significant a woman's mental abuse towards how significant women's mental abuse is towards men. Um, and particularly in the society of today within the United States and in much of industrialized society, how pervasive and normalized and systemic it is, how much of a given, how much of it is established as a standard of norm within society, the abuses. And when men try to be healthy, or speak to the circumstances, then men are accused of being chauvinistic or otherwise. Um, so, anyways, that's something of the consideration of mindfulness. Um, I'll just jump into the third, the further step, and then there was the third item that I mentioned, and interestingly enough, the third item might actually kind of help diplomatically deal with the diggy of this. So just to take this whole notion of the mental abuse and physical abuse further. Um, this might seem very crass. It's actually purposeful. It's not just gratuitous. There's a purposefulness with what I am sharing at this moment. I'm trying to think of a delicate way to articulate this. Um, all right. I'm just going to say it as best I can articulate at the moment. When we talk about the interaction between man and woman, and when we talk about the intimacy, um, when we talk about a woman hoe and a man hoe, and the type of violation that men commit against women, and the type of violation that women commit against men, we can consider the motivation. Why do men abuse women in such a way? Why do men pursue and turn out women hoes? Why do women pursue and turn out man hoes? Men, aside from like the ego and everything else like that, men have this a need of sexual intercourse and ejaculation, and it's a multifold need. But there's a physical need. It builds and it builds and it builds, and it becomes a distraction. And there's a calling for man to procreate and to plant his seed within fertile soil and further. And when he's without the discipline, and the relationship to do that, then he tries to optimize where he expends himself accordingly. But that's what happens, and that's the motivation generally for men pursuing women hoes. It's for a man to expend and release the physical angst, the stress that he's experiencing in order to have an ejaculation in the maximum, in a way that most promotes his ego and sense of self. And that's in that particular context. It's not the healthiest way of doing that, but that's in that context. So that's a significant motivation for a man pursuing a woman hoe. So then, on the flip side, what is the consideration concerning um, a woman pursuing a man hoe? What is it when a man violates the body of a woman and expends himself in that process, bodily expends himself in that process? Then how is that occurred in the flip side? It is this: a woman violates a man mentally, and again, we're speaking in general sense. A woman mentally violates a man and uses a man's mind for her own purposes, gratification, um, or whatever. It's a little bit different. It's not the same thing that concerning the man towards a woman physically, but it's for her own purposes. So when a man commits the violation of the woman's body and expends himself bodily, when a woman violates a man's mind, how does she do that? What is she expending? Okay, this is basically our understanding at the moment of how it works. A prominent way of how it works. A woman is experiencing stress. She's experiencing pressure. She's experiencing anxiety. She has a need of emitting it, of purging it from her mind and body and otherwise. So, whereas a man does that through sexual intercourse and ejaculation, a woman does that through verbal intercourse or through even just expression. And through that expression, she imposes or transmits that stress and anxiety, whatever, onto the man whom she is abusing. And that is how she expends herself mentally. She purges that stress through that expression, particularly verbally. And so, whereas a man's orgasm is the physical emission of his seed from his body, a woman's orgasm is her emission of expression, and particularly verbal, from her interior onto another man. That's her ejaculation. A woman's voice, a woman's word, is her ejaculation. That's the crass, that's the diggy, and that might sound way off. Here's the consideration: to understand and recognize how uncommon it is for a woman to casually and regularly communicate within the forums of society. There's reason for that. It's not just chauvinistic. And it's not just subordination. There's a tremendous amount of power and influence in a woman's voice. There's power in a man's voice too. But it's just a matter of recognizing that. If we look at today and we see all women talking all over the place and say, well, that's not all ejaculation. Maybe that's simply just how pervasive the behavior is. Maybe that's simply how pervasive the stress and anxiety is, and how normalized it is for women to express and emit that, rather than doing it with a husband in private, in a committed relationship, and she's sharing her intimacy and he's sharing his intimacy with her. Just like men are going out and doing this and the other, or just going on the online and looking at pornography and wanking and expending themselves, ourselves collectively, women are out and ejaculating within public discourse and emitting the stress and anxiety that women are experiencing through mental abusing just in the open. So maybe kinfolk can see some semblance of legitimacy within that and kind of consider that a little bit further. Here's a further consideration. Again, all of this is, in our humble estimation, a necessity of recognizing the element of truth within what I'm articulating at this moment for the purpose of healing. When kinfolk look at all the different trials and tribulations that are going on in world society today, these, what I'm describing, what I'm articulating, what I'm expressing, are symptoms as well as contributing factors to these conditions. And it's in an unhealthy way. So for us to relieve or to heal the conditions of the world, and things that are immediately causing these conditions of the world, we have to acknowledge these circumstances. And sexual behavior, sexual intercourse is such a fundamental, foundational component of macro societal experience. And simultaneously, modern science woefully ignores that, because modern science seems to be significantly enveloped within these corruptions of body, mind, heart, and spirit. So that's the consideration. The additional element of this is this: to recognize men are generally physically stronger than women. The ways in which men tend to predominantly violate women is physically. The exploitation of man towards woman is predominantly physical and particularly sexual. When a man violates a woman directly, sexually, he actually expends himself physically. The further element and the further consideration of that is that when a man has sexual intercourse with a woman and expends himself, has the emission of semen and the decrease of his life force, he also becomes further vulnerable and beholden to the woman, whether he acknowledges it or otherwise, regardless of how he interacts with the woman or treats her afterwards. From that point, he is continually subjugated to that woman through that physical sexual intercourse. He is vulnerable. When a man has that emission of semen, he may have a stoic face or whatever else. That is a vulnerability. That is a weakness. A woman sees a different side of that man when he is in that state. It is a vulnerability. And a woman can make decisions or otherwise accordingly. She can stay quiet and use that against him as a way of ongoing reactionary subjugation. She can call it out, put it on the street, embarrass him, and humiliate him or whatever else, but that's a quick expenditure. The long-term expenditure is her not saying anything and just quietly manipulating him in the mind because of his vulnerability through the body. So That's on that side. When we do the flip side, when a women recognize women are generally mentally stronger than men, the ways in which women generally abuse men is through the mental. That includes the exploitation. When women generally exploit men, it is through the mental of men, the mentality, the mind of men. When a woman mentally violates, molests a man, she is doing so predominantly through her expression. It could be nonverbal, but often it is verbal. I described that before as the women's form of ejaculation. And in a way that is commensurate with a man, when a woman does that, she is expending herself. When a woman expresses herself, particularly through the verbal, but in any way a woman expresses herself, nonverbal or verbal, but particularly through the verbal, she is revealing information about herself. She's putting herself out there. And she has a vulnerability to the men that she exposes herself to. Just like the man has a vulnerability when he is violating or intimate with a woman is vulnerable when she communicates, expresses herself to another man. And just as a woman can use the abuse from a man as a methodology or as a premise for reactionary subjugation, when a man is put upon and abused mentally by women, he receives the information about the women and has the reactionary propensity of utilizing that as reactionary subjugation. Guilty conscience within the sistren. I have suffered much of that man today. So, something to consider, even for one's own personal self-interest. Understand the yin and the yang. Understand the balance. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. Always, continually. Hallelujah. So there's that. Now I said there's a third element. That was the conclusion for the second joint. The further end of the diggy of the second joint. I mentioned there being a third joint. I think I was able to reach a certain level of congeniality in concluding that second joint. Maybe it makes sense, at least as I'm saying it. It seems to make sense to me. However, I mentioned this being a third thing, and I mentioned, ironically, the third thing might be being able to provide some kind of like solace, maybe is one way of describing it, to what I was just describing. Now that I'm looking at it, I'm like, I don't know if it's going to be any further solace than where we're at right now, but I've already said the intention of articulating it, so here we go. It's the Illuminati. That the Illuminati is supposed to provide solace. Yeah, at least in the initial estimation, and it's still applicable, but when we think of how serious the notion is of a woman's verbal intercourse being her form of ejaculation, the Illuminati seems like, well, maybe we'd rather talk about the Illuminati. And I don't mean to make light, but I am making light. I am sharing light. So I'm particularly responding to a brief video I see. I'm not getting this done today. Let's do something. All right, let's wrap this up and get something done, God willing. Hallelujah. All right. The Illuminati. I was watching something. I'm trying to think if I name names and be specific or whatever else. It helps to provide context and like relatability. But But if I give names, that lends itself to getting further detailed in this articulation. So I'm trying to do some estimation before I get into it. All right. Well, I'll get into it and try to be brief, and then see how it goes and wrap it up. I'm without anything specific that I can think of at the moment in terms of positive and kind of wrap this joint up with a positive joint. Um, but we'll see how the Spirit moves us as we continue on. So, hallelujah, God willing, alhamdulillah, inshallah, Bezrat Hashem, God willing, we'll find a positive note to wrap this joint up with. Here we go. Illuminati. The video that I see is again brief TikTok, and right now I'm on low budget internet access. I've done used up the data for the month, so I'm in that zone of stagnation for minutes before a video pops up or whatever. It's 12. It takes about 15 minutes for a 15-second video. I ain't complaining. It's just the facts. So that's where things are. And amidst that, okay, let's keep the whole internet thing to the side for the moment. AI, all that to the side for the moment. This particular video that I view just this past day features two kinfolk. FouseyTube, his actual name escapes me at the moment. I know it's Yusuf. And the brethren who is referred to as Neon. There was a conversation between the two of them. Now, I'm uncertain about all the details in recent history, whatever else. I'm not uncertain about the details of the past few years. What I am aware of is I see FouseyTube, the brethren. Peace and blessings be with FouseyTube. Peace and blessings be with Neon as well. I see FouseyTube on the YouTube internet web a number of years ago, actually. And I think at that time that I saw him, he was like he had arrived into like the internet famous kind of realm. So he had a following, and I in a lot of his videos of like his path, like his original videos, I think were still on his YouTube channel. So when I saw him, started seeing some of the track record of like the path that he got to where he was, and it might have been maybe a few years, 2 or 3 years into his thing. He was living in California, I think Los Angeles, the land of the Tongva. He had a very modest like staff at that point. He had enough. He was making enough from his internet activity or whatever to be able to have a staff. But the staff was just very like kinfolk that he knows or whatever. I remember there being one sister who was I think she was of Indian ancestry, and so that was part of the dynamic. And he has an interesting kind of intelligence. I mean, he's a brilliant brethren, but at the same time, he's dealing with a lot of things that can work against oneself. And it's always interesting to observe that within any of us, to say, how can somebody be so intelligent and like brilliant in this one particular sense, but then in that sense, like everybody knows that, why doesn't he see that? I apply that to myself. I'm very oblivious in many ways. And in certain ways, I'm very genius, if I do say so myself. Everybody is genius. So if we do say so ourselves. Anyways, observing that with him and seeing some of the track record and how he got to where he was at that time. And this was probably 5-6 years ago. And I was watching the internet much further at that time. The internet was still like the classic age of the internet, when people were actually, you could see a video, get their email, and hit them up and like collab immediately without all the pretenses and everything else. Like, it was still, that was there, but at that time people were starting to like get into the whole monetizing thing, and it was starting to be a business, and the YouTube scene was starting to like be at that next kind of level or whatever. So I'm still from the old school of the internet, of the YouTube kind of culture, whatever. So I'm just like, okay, this is interesting, brother. And actually, I think how I found him was that at that time, and this is again, wow, this is probably actually like 7-8 years ago, I was looking for kinfolk, YouTubers, from different ethnic backgrounds, from different ethnic communities, to be able to see what's going on in other communities, because there was difficulty in being continually involved and any particular one ethnic community coming from a mixed heritage experience and the diplomacy. So there's an interest of seeing like what representation from different communities there are. And so again, just doing a very rudimentary search and trying to find kinfolk, this example of FusiTube was shown. So I see some of his videos, like interesting. I mean, he's not like talking about current events or being a talking head in terms of politics or whatever else, but okay, this is interesting. Um, and so I start watching some of his joints. Now I'm an older brethren watching. He's probably at least 20 years, well, about 20 years thereabouts younger than myself. So I'm like uncle status in that terms, or just in terms of age. So what's a grown dude watching this young kid do this and that? He's providing with me with news of society and where people's mindsets are, and additionally. So again, I'm gonna say 6 7 years, given the estimations that I've said, 6 7 years ago. That seems about right. And it was just at that time, like he seemed to like go from like YouTube famous to like unique status kind of within YouTube. And it was before streaming and all that other stuff. He was starting to travel, and he was starting to connect with other YouTubers and everything else like that. My reason for saying that is I remember there are a few distinct things. The video that I see today, I guess I'll just share this. In the video, and again, it was maybe like a 30-second clip or whatever else. And Neon is talking with FusiTube or Yusuf at a doing what Neon does as a streamer. And I know my knowledge about streaming is extremely modest. I don't watch streaming. I don't even know where to go for that. I see the clips on social media, TikTok, YouTube, or Instagram, but I don't even know where to go for to see streaming or whatever else. I've heard things here and there, but I'm pretty much off of the streaming thing. So I got things to focus on already. So, but I'm aware of like some cats. This was actually Fusitu was about the same time as the other brethren. He mentioned him actually also in the clip. Um, he's mixed. The brethren from whose parents are Haitian and Korean. Hadibanga. Um, he goes by a nickname as well. No shade. I wasn't. Uh, and I found him particularly because he is mixed, and that's a whole nother story with his channel and his path, and additionally, and I know he's gone through trials and tribulations of recent years. I hear him talking about buying property, or whatever. That's a whole another story. Um, but it was about at the same time. I think the brethren, he was based in the New York area in the land of the Mohawk. Um, and I think he might have started at the same time or maybe a little bit earlier than Fusi, but they eventually connected and I guess become friends or whatever. And Fusi to Yusuf mentions that in the clip today. So basically, the clip from today, they're talking. Neon is asking Yusuf questions. One question he asks is if Yusuf would ever think about coming back to streaming, and Yusuf talks about like he's first of all his mannerism is very different than what I've seen through the years. He seems to be calmer. I'm uncertain. I'm just observing from a distance. He seems to be calmer and like further together. He talks about rehab. He talks about this, that, and the other. He's talked about that a lot through the years as well, through the ebbs and flows. So you have to take it with a grain of salt. But he seems his energy is along those lines, and he's not the like the caricature that I see in recent years, on the realm of being like a Borat or an Ali kind of figure, but he seems to be like a further normalized whatever. And he talks about that. He talks about him embarrassing himself, him shaming himself, shaming his family, and for that reason, that he's less inclined towards returning to streaming because it was an unhealthy experience for him overall. That being said, he also mentions like doing some things that were rather monumental in the industry, that gives other people a platform to do similar things like Neon, and Neon kind of like cosigns or just checks, like agrees with what he was saying about that. But I'll share something that I saw as a video many years ago when Yusuf was doing his videos on YouTube. Um, and it was after I found his channel and started seeing some of the stuff. And to be honest, I'll be honest. Like when I find something that's of interest and like it's a uniqueness or whatever, and there's a value, insight, and I see intelligence and I see an intentionality, and a further depth of purpose, with what somebody is doing, I tend to binge watch. Like, okay, let's see what's going on with this. And so I saw a lot of what he does. I saw the videos with his family, the family gatherings from the early years. I saw I want to see some of the travels. Um, I saw a fair amount of what his path, his friendship with the brethren named Roman. I saw the beef and the squash with the kinfolk, the other Muslim kinfolk from the New York area, and I actually saw that brethren too, and that whole crew, which was very interesting. Going on side notes here, but and the names that escape me, I know, but I think one brethren is named Adam. I want to say, Slim is one of the brethren's name. Peace and blessings to all the kinfolk that I'm naming. But I actually remember when that crew was actually like the sidekicks, and I mean with all due respect, was actually like the sidekicks of the one brethren, um, who is I want to say maybe his name is Kareem. I don't want to say it inaccurately, but I saw that again when looking for kinfolk or whatever. This was many years ago. There was a brethren who was on YouTube, and he seemed to be like he knew how to do things on the internet further than what his friends knew, and so he had established a certain platform, and then he was vlogging, and then he would show his friends, and his friends would join it or whatever, but it was predominantly him. And I remember some of the like the scenarios that he would do, but I think he was an actor, but he did other things as well, particularly to pay the bills, presumably otherwise. And so I think there at some point, and I don't mean to like delve into like negative things or whatever else because I'm uncertain what the details are, but it seems as though at some point there is before that his friends get involved, and then like they start to like get very well known and very supported, particularly within the Muslim community, and it becomes no longer him being the front man and everybody else being the sidekicks. Like everybody else was like their own man in their own right, and they started to establish their own YouTube channel, and they had their own following. And additionally, to the point where eventually there seemed to be a riff between the friends, and I think there were four friends altogether initially, and then two, Slim and the brethren, who seemed to be eventually the most popular one of them all. Kind of go on their own path. One of the brethren, who was the dark skin, I think he was from Pakistan. The brethren, I think he just kind of like, yeah, I'm out, and I because I didn't see too much of him after a while. And then the brethren, if I don't recall his name specifically, Kareem, kind of goes on his way, but he doesn't become as big as the brethren Slim and otherwise are. So it was interesting to see that. And at some point, I kind of like stopped watching just because life happens or whatever. And then I turn it back on and I catch up. I'm like, wait, hold up, what? Yo, they're the main ones, and he's doing his own thing, and they're not talking what. And I don't think it was a big beef per se. I don't know, but there seemed to be some type of reconciliation. I think maybe, but anyways, I just remember that being part of the scene. And the reason why I say that in this side note is that I know, again, a few years later, whatever, when people are getting big in their followings or whatever, traveling and having venues and events, and not just meetups, but like concert type stuff. And then the Muslim brethren attending and admonishing kinfolk for haram, and I see the scene. So um, eventually, the brethren, and again, it's the English language and nicknames, whatever. But the brethren, slim, tall, kind of lanky, whatever. After a few years, and I like catch them like, oh wait, there's this update or whatever, and it just so happens Yusuf is still like getting even larger, and has a larger following and is further um, infamous and famous, and acknowledged within the YouTube sphere of the big YouTubers of, I guess, the PewDiePie status or whatever else. But so is the brethren coming from the York, and I know this was a few years, just only a few years ago, maybe 3 or 4 years ago. There was a boxing match between Slim and Yusuf, and there was expectation of Yusuf beating Slim because one, Yusuf is kind of like further built, and his mindset is just like you don't know what's going to happen. And actually, Slim won the joint. by TKO, I think it was. And he had the reach, but I guess he was training and he took it serious. And he might have been slender, but he had that reach. He had a jab, and he was kind of messing up Yusuf's nose. I think he broke his nose actually in the process. This is before the days of Jake Paul or whatever the brother's name is. Due respect, kinfolk come from the O. Um, so I remember that, and I remember particularly I saw the bout. I remember like Slim. It went for a number of rounds, and at one point, like I remember like the look in Slim's eyes. Like he was handling Yusuf. He didn't look. He was like untouched. Like Yusuf maybe did a few things, but otherwise, like Slim was very much in control the whole time and just like keeping away with that jab or whatever. Um, and like Yusuf just kept on coming at him. And I remember like Slim, I look at like an astonishment in his eyes, like he's like scared, like yo, who is this dude? Why does he keep on coming at me, yo? What's going on? And he was like, yo, I'm hurting this dude. Why does he keep on coming at me? And like Yusuf was like in another mode, and you could see his mentality of his drive, and it's not just an entertainment thing, and it's not him being crazy. It's just him being locked in, for better and for worse, and like being comparatively indifferent of what happens to him in that process, and that can be a scary thing. That when somebody's encountered with that, so I just remember that Yusuf's nose was all bloodied and everything else, and like he was getting handled, but like he was coming at him, just coming out, and I remember just like Slim's eyes. Like the ref had I think at one point had stopped things or whatever. There was a pause in it, and Slim just like, why is this dude still coming at me? Yo, I'm hitting him. I'm hitting him, and like he's still coming at me. What's going on? And I think eventually the fight got stopped. So, anyways, and I think there was some underlying beef, and the fight was a way of like squashing the beef, and it was a community charity event or whatever else. But there was a further context to all of that. So, anyways, that's some of the scene that I'm familiar with, in observing it from a distance um, this chair, this seat in this domicile. So that's some of what I'm familiar with concerning you. Oh, so the a big thing I'll say this, and before I like get into the thing, and God willing wrap it up. We're at 2 hours now. Could we expect anything else other than that? All right. Um, we're making up for 3 months. A notable thing in Yusuf's craft and the service that he provides. Um, he shows some things about the internet, about social media, and he shows some things to young people about young people. And I'll explain that by sharing this episode. And again, it's not a perfect thing because Yosef, particularly at that stage, is very young himself, and he doesn't have a lot of guidance in terms of like somebody who's done it before him and tells him what to do and how to apply. Because Yusuf has a yearning for a compassion for people and for life and for helping things. But at the same time, he's a young man. He's got a lot of things going on, just like athletes or whatever, and can get distracted. He's religious. His family is religious. He comes from a knowledge of teachings of righteousness from the Quran, and additionally, so he has that knowledge set. But at the same time, he's in the world, and his teacher from earlier in life tells him that he'll never be an actor, and to give up that dream of being famous or whatever else. And I think that was further motivation, and that in itself is not just an isolated episode. It's him being a Muslim, him being Palestinian, growing up in North California, in the land of the Oleon, in the Bay, or I don't think he was in the Bay, or it's a little bit south of the Bay, but just growing up in that scene of suburban California, and in a very Eurocentric thing, and being told, yeah, you're not going to get it like us, what kind of thing, and then him saying, okay, we'll see, and then going on further, um, getting his nose bloody the whole time. So uh, that's some of the things that I observe, and in that path, because I know that path fairly well, there is a strong susceptibility of getting enveloped within the standards, within the expectations, within the aspirations of being significant, of being important, of being valued. And in that process, people often lose a sense of self, where one comes from, one learns from one's family and additionally. So I see a certain amount of that element, and it's very difficult to avoid that, particularly when being. I shared the shade that he got, but he gets a lot of love, particularly from Eurocentric kinfolk, and he gets partnerships. I remember he visits Roman here in Ohio, south of here. Um, Again, I'm not. It's not fanboying. I watch and I remember, and so and there's something that is being learned about the internet, about society, about relationships through observing this. And so here's this Palestinian coming from the Bay or from North Carolina, California, and he's visiting this other YouTuber, how they met or whatever, one way or the other, but they knew each other enough to be cool with each other. And that brethren, Roman, I think it's Atwood, I think his name is, he's married with children, living in like rural Ohio, in southern part of Ohio. And Yusuf goes and visits him, stays with him in his house, whatever, and vlogs the whole time. Roman is his own vlogger and has his own following. And additionally, I think it referred to as the Roman Army, which don't necessarily subscribe to that joint, but peace and blessings all the same to Roman as well and all his kinfolk. So that's what Yusuf is showing. He's showing life through his own experience and his own discovery and answering his own call in life. So that being said, share this one episode that is kind of like, I won't say the epitome, but like it's one of the things that Yusuf shows to the world, young people, society, leadership, about society self. In his personality, in his striving to be compassionate, and additionally, there's a situation, again, he's vlogging all the time. He's going on, he has stage, or not, won't say stage, but he has set like meetings with people and planned activities or whatever. But at the same time, he's just like, he goes to the restaurant or whatever, and he's vlogging the time. So whatever happens then, and again, this is before streaming when it becomes a thing. He's just vlogging, and usually it's not real time. He records it. Sometimes I think maybe YouTube is allowing live, and maybe that was happening. I think at that time, technologically, there was less of a capacity of people streaming live from a mobile device 7 years thereabouts ago. Now it's further available. So, anyways, on this one episode, he was doing something, whatever. He might have been coming from a restaurant, and he found this dude who was homeless on the street. So now he's a compassionate dude, Brother Yusuf is, and so he wants to do help, but he doesn't just want to help. He might want to show out a little bit in front of his audience and show what he's doing, but like he wants to help the dude, and he wants to help the dude in a meaningful way. So he has a conversation with the dude, and eventually, like he makes arrangements for the dude to stay at a motel. He wants to give the dude a makeover, like to shave and clean up and get ready for an interview, to get a job, and what do you need, and this and the other, get some clothes. Like, okay, we'll do everything that you can do, because Yusuf was making bank, seemingly at that time. He had a sports car, whatever. So he wants to share some of his wealth for this purpose of helping this brother out that he just met, and he's vlogging, showing it at that time. And the particular part of the episode is that in endeavoring to do that for whatever motivation people want to accuse him of having in that respect, he goes to the motel and he wants to rent a room, so the brethren can stay in the room for the night, for the next few nights, whatever, so that Yusuf can come back and follow up with these other arrangements that he's describing. So, okay, no problem. He got money, he got credit card, he got all types of credentials. So he goes to the motel, and it's just some ordinary motel nearby or whatever. And he goes to the motel to check the brethren in, and the motel would not accept him. The motel would not accept the homeless brethren staying there, because the motel clerk looks at Yusuf and says, okay, that's a dude who has money. Okay, this other dude, no, I know who that dude is. I know what he's about, and I'm not trying to have that in my establishment. He's going to be here, and then we can't get him out, and this, that, and the other. It's going to cost it. No, not just going to go through it. No. And that was it. And I remember distinctly, like Yusuf becoming incensed, because now he's experiencing a limitation to his powers. And this is something that should just be ordinarily done. So how dare some motel clerk deny him of this legitimate purpose of, like, he's not trying to do any illicit activity, whatever. Yo, what? You tell me I can't do something? So he gets a little bit incensed and being told no. And I mean, obviously, there's a certain element of humiliation or pride or whatever else, but there's a righteous indignation about that because he's like, I'm trying to help somebody out, and here's this motel clerk won't even check him. I got money, I'll pay for the whole thing, I'll pay a deposit, whatever. Come on, let him stay here. What you want to? So then Yusuf, and perhaps feeling a little bit of a disempowerment about that, because the clerk would not budge. So then Yusuf goes to find another solution. So as he's walking out the door, and he's filming the whole thing, and people weren't accustomed to vlogs at that point, not so much. So to be on the radar screen, like, oh, you can't film here. The motel clerk was just like whatever, oblivious to that. So and that's part of it too. Like Yusuf was playing the role of like the undercover hero, superhero, or whatever. Because people don't, when they see him on the street, they don't know that he has a million people watching him. They don't know what he's got going on. They just see some dude with a camera, whatever. And again, this is in the days before it was a normal thing, or at least further popular, even in California. So when he got rejected by the motel clerk, now he's like goes into superhero mode, and so he's like, oh, he just don't know, he don't know, and he goes outside the motel, and then he turns the camera onto the motel that has its name and number and everything else like that, and he just says, and he calls his followers, his audience, bruh at that time. So he says, bruh, you know what to do, and that was it. And then from that, what can be expected to happen was that the motel got flooded with calls and threats and everything else like that. And Yusuf wasn't necessarily intending his audience to be violent or threatening or whatever else like that, but he wanted to flex and let the motel know, like, you mess with the wrong kinfolk. You just don't know. Like, we can cause trouble that it would be beneficial for you to just agree and da da da. Not in those words, but it's not meant as a violent thing, but at the same time, when you do that, you don't know who you're talking to. When Yusuf says that to his brothers, he doesn't know who he's actually talking to, and that's part of like being young, the phenomena of the internet and social media and streaming or vlogging being new as well, and not knowing what's going to happen. But there wasn't anything serious to my knowledge that happened as a consequence, but the motel got flooded with calls and like harassment, and additionally after that, so that when Yusuf comes back to the motel, like the motel was contrite, and like I have to recall that particular like how that followed through with it, but it was basically like just like wow, yeah, we've gotten, it's ridiculous how much phone calls, the phone won't stop ringing, we've gotten so much abuse, this and the other. If we did anything there, I think there was an apology or something like that. But I mean, come on, they're just a small little motel or whatever, trying to do their thing. They make a decision based upon what the experience is of dealing with kinfolk who are without homes and otherwise. And so it's not some corporate kind of thing that goes toe to toe with whatever. So, anyways, it was an interesting thing. It was an interesting scenario. It was an interesting episode that showed the significance of youth and the internet at that time that had yet to be significantly acknowledged or understood um, by much of society at that time. And so Yusuf was showed that just by his doing what he does. Um, so, like I said, it's not all not all peaches and cream in that path, and there are things that he does that are gratuitous and this that, and the other. He does the best that he can. So, um, in the conversation that is shared today, or that I see today on so Brother Neon, I'm aware of Brother Neon. Well, let's finish with Yusuf and then continue with Neon. So, within the past 4 years or so, or 5 years, I haven't watched much of online social media of anyone, to be honest, and the whole thing has changed. It's very difficult to find valuable. There's a lot of valuable things still out there, and I find it occasionally. But in terms of just like the safety of the internet is much less at this point. It's not as a safe place, and there's much further susceptibility of finding things that are further unsafe than just like casually just doing a search and searching for something and then finding it. There's so much further susceptibility of being directed into unhealthy avenues. And so the internet is very different today than it was even just 5 years ago. So don't watch much of it. Don't lend myself too much to like searches for people that I don't know already, or without some specific specific purpose. Um, so that's just the way things are at this point. It's sad, but that's what it is. So I haven't kept up with what's happened in the past few years, but seemingly, even when I saw Yusuf in years ago, his channel that is, he was going through ebbs and flows. He would go through parts of being very like next stage type of accomplishments, and then like crash out and like can't mess with anybody for the next few months or whatever. There was times when he would go off of YouTube and say that's it. I think he deleted one of his channels. I think there's been like suspensions, or there's been other things, and a lot of YouTubers and whatever streamers have experienced that. Sneeko is the other brother's name. So he goes through similar circumstances with that as well. And I abstain from keeping up with all of that. Sneeko has his own interesting narrative, and I saw some of his first videos when he was just getting started. Some of the conversations that he had with people before becomes kind of like, I won't say gimmicky, but in respect to Brethren Sneeko as well, peace and blessings to him. I particularly watch his content or what he shares, particularly from the context of being mixed and identifying along those lines, and being somewhat frustrated that we have yet to kind of establish a mechanism or an infrastructure in the mixed community to have that intergenerational kind of communication without it being reduced to like being a fanboy or being on somebody else's channel. Or it's like, yo, just being as a community and like sharing, yo, seeing some things you do, here's some thoughts you can consider or whatever else. So anyways, I observed some of what he does, and he has some interesting conversations, very intelligent, very provocative, and calling people out on hypocrisies and denials and other things. Again, for better and for worse, young and still searching for things. Coming from New York, perhaps a wee bit jaded about experience, but still trying to find it. I remember his first trip to England, I think it was, again, years ago, and that being a thing, because up to that point, he was very worldly, but just New York. He might have been to Haiti before, but that was, I think the England thing was a considerable step in his path, particularly in terms of vocation. Um, but a lot of it was the conversations that he has, and just like interviewing people, questioning people about life and God and purpose and things like that, society, men and women, and this and the other. I remember him being confronted by an intoxicated woman on one point, and he seemed to actually be enamored by her. And she was just like challenging him, like, "What are you doing? What is this all about?" Da da da. And she was intoxicated, so it was difficult for him to like have a coherent conversation with him. But in a similar way to how I described the incident with Yusuf, um, like a few days later or whatever, she finds him again, and was like, "Yo, I've gotten so many responses from people seeing that video, da 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 da." So and again, for better or for worse, I've seen some things. I saw him when he gets his move to Miami a few years later, and again, by that point, I'm just seeing things here and there. But saw when he got hit in at the club. It's interesting. It would be interesting to plot out how he got into this mode of, um, I guess it's the MAGA mode, Make America Great Again, and like it's not unheard of or whatever, but it seems as though his political inclinations in the early stages are rather different than that, and maybe from having a certain amount of monetary um, windfall or whatever, then the people who he associates with and who support him in these strategic alliances or whatever are aligned with these certain types of politics. And so he's able to listen to the rationale. He becomes Muslim and goes through the process, as I understand, of converting to Islam, which is, alhamdulillah, him finding a path where he finds truth and support. I remember in recent years, him going on an interview with imams and at masjids and otherwise, and again streaming, and that not being the most receptive thing when going to the masjid. But I've seen less of that. I've just seen parts of it here and there, and I know there's been challenges with the YouTube channels or whatever else. So, and I mentioned that because Yusuf in his video today with Neon makes reference to his relationships with Neon and with Sneeko and other kinfolk, and how he betrays or lets down his friends, how he abuses his friends in the things that he was experiencing at life, and acknowledging that, and that being one of the reasons why he doesn't want to go back to that, because he doesn't want to do that again. And so that was part of the conversation with Neon and Sneeko. I also remember Sneeko talking about Neon when Neon was just getting started. Is it? No, it's not Neon. It's Neo. I don't no, I don't mean any disrespect with that. Peace and blessings and respect to Neo. But I remember that, and I was like, I don't know who Neo is because I don't watch streaming, and I think Neo just predominantly does streaming, and I'm off of, like I said, but I see the clips, and I understand he's very famous as a streamer, and he's still active, which is why I see the clip. Um, so that's what Yusuf mentions in the conversation, and the whole point of all of that, well, how much was that? At least half an hour. The whole point of that is that in that conversation, Yusuf makes a statement to Neo. And basically, Yusuf says that he thinks that Neo is in the Illuminati, that he has been initiated formally within the Illuminati. And Yusuf speaks like just very calmly and matter of factly about it, not accusatory or whatever else. He was just speaking matter of factly, particularly, and I recognize the sign of it. He's speaking because he has an interest in truth. He's not being accusatory. He's not trying to like leverage that, but he has to speak to it. He's not just going to be polite and ignore it or whatever else. He speaks to it even when it's being in front of the stream or whatever, because that's what he has to do for himself in his own integrity, and to be mindful of it, and not to get enveloped in the secrecy and the avoidance of it. So he speaks to it. I'm recognizing as that's part of the path of the righteous, is not to speak hatefully or accusatory, but to acknowledge, to state it, to be matter of fact about it, so that a lot of the powers of manipulation and exploitation is manifested through avoidance, pretending that it doesn't exist, being too fearful or too uncomfortable or too timid to call it out. And in doing it, it just like grows. And then it becomes further imposed upon and expected, and further difficult to address directly. So that's just the nature of the phenomena. So that's what I recognize within Yusuf's address towards Neo. He might have some doubts, but he has some concerns, and so he articulates that, and they're having a conversation. And again, we got 30 seconds I'm working with in terms of what I'm saying at this moment, aside from all the backlog. Um, I've seen some of the clips of Neo's life in the past few years, again, just by watching social media, TikTok, Instagram. And so I know things here and there. I speak less about it because I haven't seen the longer versions of the communities. I've seen the longer content of Yusuf and Sneeko to speak about it in a narrative and summation kind of way. With Neo, I just see the clips. So I've seen the things about relationships that he has, interactions that he has, reputation, challenges, controversies, or whatever else. But all of those I've received through the clip form, and it's less prudent to like repeat or build an understanding or a presumed knowledge about the brethren without seeing further like conversation and context or otherwise. So I I just say what I said about the brethren accordingly, with all due respect. So he was interviewing Yusuf. Yusuf was saying, that Yusuf has concerns about the brethren Neo being in the Illuminati, and Neo vehemently denies it and asks why this and the other. But the way Yusuf responds to Neo's reaction is interesting, because Yusuf is responding and articulating with two significant characteristics. One characteristic is that it's something that he's familiar with, that he's seen before, that he knows, that he's already gone through it with other people, and so he has experiential knowledge about what he's saying, and he's observing some of the same characteristics within Neo, and just calling it out and just seeing, okay, what's going on. And again, he's saying it without hate. He's not being I won't say accusatory, but he's not being like um, judgmental or whatever, but he's just being very matter of fact. Like this, that's what is being observed. Neo is the one who responds with like vehemence. Wow, what you talking about? Da, 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 da. Serious, serious. And then Yosef just explains, like, yo, this is what I've seen. I'm observing things within you. I'm observing things that are going on in your life. And what I've observed in my life with others that I've experienced in life is that they've experienced those same things, opportunities, advantages, and otherwise. And they've gotten it through affiliation and initiation with a certain realm. And it's not hate, but I'm just observing that. And so Neo tries to deny it, and additionally, and then Yusuf becomes further specific about what he's observing. That gives him those signs and those concerns. He cites certain things that Neo has been able to do that usually only people who have made that initiation are able to do. And then he specifically, and this is how the video concludes, he specifically cites like what Neo was wearing at that moment, which is a very effeminate, like silk type of night robe or whatever. In the middle of the day, they're in a public space in a franchise fast food type place with families around or whatever. And so Yusuf mentions that. He says, look what you're wearing in the middle of the day, in public, in front of children. That's what you're wearing. And that's a, and they're talking about selling one's soul, and Neo saying, oh, he's his own man, and this and the other. And Yusuf says, just look what you're wearing. And let that speak for itself. And so that was strong, and that's where the clip ends. And presumably, I don't know if that's a clip that actually Neo issues or his team issues, or if it's somebody who's doing it. The mechanics of how those things work is a little bit beyond my expertise or otherwise. But it's content, and it promotes in certain ways Neo's channel, so it might be promoted in that way, even when it's accusatory of him doing that. But the particular thing, like I said, is the interesting thing is Yusuf's articulation, his response in articulating his concern. I described the first characteristic of it. The second characteristic of it, him addressing his concerns regarding Neo's activity or circumstances, is that Yusuf is communicating, and you can see this, and I know this again from what I've observed from the years of him sharing his life, visiting with family, and additionally, that he's articulating that concern particularly and distinctly from the perspective, and not just the perspective, but from the experience and the foundation of being Muslim. It is through his iman, through his faith and his affiliation. I would say deen, but that would be somewhat presumptuous. But it's through the deen of his family, and the deen of his community, of how he is raised, and additionally, and his further recent calmness that I observe in just his demeanor in the clip, that he is able to articulate that with a certain amount of strength. And the strength, particularly, is not by pointing fingers, oh, you're this and the other, but just saying, I'm observing this. And I'm comparatively indifferent one way or the other. You do what you do, but this is what I'm observing. And it takes strength to be able to articulate something like that, to call something out like that, and not be fueled by righteous indignation. And have the strength to say it, call it out in public, and have a certain amount of fortitude and a sense of, okay, I'm still going to be okay with my community or whatever else in calling this out. And there might be motivation with the geopolitics and additionally. But that was what was interesting. One of the things that was interesting in that communication. But it also reveals further of the culture of entertainment, Hollywood, the internet at this point, and social media, and the types of conversations that kinfolk have with Illuminati type kinfolk, and the scenario, how it goes down. Kinfolk watch Cat Williams and hear some of what Cat Williams has to share, and his testimony in that respect. To be honest, a lot of what Cat Williams shares, though, is sensationalized, because that's his nature. He's a comedian and he's a performer, so he's going to articulate that with intelligence and charisma. But at the same time, there's a sensationalism. So it becomes a matter of like, how much are you going to believe one way or the other? And then the other thing is, in Cat Williams' delivery is the presumption or the expectation that he infers of him calling out all these other kinfolk who've done things, but he himself not doing that. That he doesn't say that explicitly. He says that concerning certain things, but in terms of it's actually different also. Cat Williams focuses on the sexual components of it, sodomy, whether it's a man going into another man, or it becomes a subordinate type of thing, which is very provocative within the black culture. Within our black culture, it's like, oh, manhood type of thing. Um, and that's not necessarily what Yusuf is talking or referring to specifically. He's referring specifically to selling of the soul, quote unquote. So the Illuminati, of the workings of the Illuminati, as is generally understood, can occur not necessarily exclusively through sodomy or other types of like sexual perversions, but again, like just the selling of the soul. Um, so anyway, all right. But again, it's the fortitude, and doing it in a non-accusatory way, and it reveals in a way that's different from what Cat Williams shares. It reveals further of just what the norm is within that scene, because Yusuf is speaking from an experience of interacting with others who go through that same thing, and there's testimony from other kinfolk who do that. I can talk about what I experienced going through law school, and talk about the devil's advocate right there. You think that's a hyperbole? You think that's metaphor? Not at all. When you see the films like literally the film called The Devil's Advocate, the other one called The Firm, Tom Cruise, Keanu Reeves, respectively, in reverse order. Those are Hollywood renderings, but a there is an actual experience that is revealed through those narratives of the spiritual journey, the spiritual um, searching that kinfolk go through from those experiences, because this is the experience of the echelons of society, the experience of being power brokers, quote unquote, um, and otherwise. It's another realm of earthly being, and there are people who are born into it and acculturated into it from an early age and just considerably stay removed from the rest of society so that it just becomes an exclusive type of thing, an experience. There are some people who are born in comparatively ordinary conditions, and who emerge one way or the other into these circles. And it's it's a necessary thing for the Illuminati, because otherwise it just kind of like um, deteriorates on its own. It needs to have that relationship and connection with the energy mass of mainstream kinfolk. So in the interaction of the select being recruited or whatever, then there's a revealing of what actually happens within that realm where kinfolk are. And so that's what Yusuf is referencing when he makes that statement. And again, it's just very casual. It's very calm, and through that calmness, there's so much further authenticity that's just related, and revealed. Now, all that being said, the Illuminati is not the only game in town, and it's a very limited um, perspective to presume that the only people on the earth, the only beings on this earth who are conspiring or whatever else, are some Greek, Roman, Judeo Christian kind of enclave of um, clandestine kinfolk. Those same elements of control exist around the world, in India, in China, Japan, Europe, native kinfolk, Africa. That phenomenon. And do you think the devil only works with a certain ethnicity or only recruits from a certain ethnicity? Come on now, let's be honest, let's be actual. It exists within Islam. Oh, da, 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 da. So, um, Did I mention Judaism? I think I did. Judeo-Christian. Okay. So did I cover the bases? That's a thing to recognize, and it's not. It's the Illuminati itself is a specific temporal reference, but people use it in a general sense, and that becomes very limiting. It limits the actuality of what exists, and it becomes a political thing at that point, because it recognizes this phenomena of cults, cultic culture, um, that exists only within one particular segment of global society. When in actuality, that same Illuminati phenomena, I'm repeating myself, but that same Illuminati phenomena exists around the world. And if somebody has an actual genuine concern about the phenomena itself, then it's appropriate to recognize its existence in the different cultures and religions and ethnicities around the world. The phenomena of the influence of shaitan, of Diabala, how we have pronounced that in Greek and Latin, the devil, say Lucifer, um, Iblis, Mara, um, temptation itself, delusion itself. So, anyways, that's the basic gist of that. Interesting to observe that being articulated with other people's experience. That's the thing for the day. We got 2.5 hours in this joint. Haishi Maishi. Um, there's a lot to say in terms of what's going on today, if I may, but not today. I must delay. In the relay, that's enough. There's a lot going on right now. There's a lot of significant things. There's a lot of the same old things. Um, at the moment, it's nearing midnight. We have yet to get to midnight yet. Howdy. We've been at this for nearly 3 hours. It's not even midnight yet. What? Um, like I said, we're being mindful of how much we put onto the internet at this point, particularly for the concerns of just inundating the internet with data, and being mindful of what we share at this point. Further mindful. We're also being further mindful of being present physically within our physical being, physical community, physical family, um, and strengthening our home base, uh, amidst the changes that exist within life and society and the world at the moment. Um, so there's a lot to like share. There's a lot that changes. There's a lot that's changing. There's a lot that's planned, but the emphasis again is our first in terms of a spiritual community. It's our spiritual practice, prayer, meditation, study, um, and the daily routine and rituals that strengthen us and give us foundation and energy and balance to encounter and proficiently deal with what we deal with on a regular basis as best we can by the grace of the Most High Elohim. That's primary. And there's work for me to do, and I'm out of shape in my spiritual practice, and it's not something that just snaps back. It's like it takes some work to get back into this shape. So that's something I'm in the process of doing, God willing. Aside from that, again, it's a service that we provide. That service is knowledge of self, world civilization. So it's knowledge of self, discipline, self, love of self, rivers, languages, calendars, song, stories, rituals, ethics, body, mind, heart, and spirit. That's what we share. And we got books, we got further materials that we're revising, making it further presentable, and accessible, God willing. It takes doing, and I can only do so much myself personally, and I have to do even less. I can do less. I'm like me sitting here right now. I'm now remembering, yo, I'm going to be hurting when I conclude this joint because my back. For me, I don't know how much I've said. I probably said this before, but yo, I got hit by a car this past year, and I'm still dealing with two fractured vertebrae. I don't do health insurance. I went to the hospital. I stayed there for a few days, for about a week. And then I got out, and that was it. So I haven't had follow up. I haven't had physical therapy or anything else like that. Um, so that's what it is. That's what the politics are. But the physical of it is that my body is still yet to heal, and I'm not using it as an excuse, but I'm just being factual. Like when I sit here, as long as I've been doing, it hurts. I have to like lay down and recuperate. And when I lay down, there's only so many things I can do when I'm in that laying down position. Um, and so that affects what I'm able to do on a daily basis. Because for much of my life, for the past 20 years, this is what I do. I sit. I watching things isn't the predominant things. I write. I do notes. I study. I sit hours upon hours upon hours. Take a break, replenish, and then continue to sit. And I cannot do that at this point to the same extent. I cannot, I'm precluded from sitting for hours and hours and hours. And that means that I'm unable to do the same things that I used to be able to do just a year ago. Um, I have to I have to plan, and that's difficult because I'm used to being able to do certain things, and so I have plans. And then when it comes time to doing it, I'm like, yo, ain't no way I can get that done like I used to be able to do. So I have to. It takes some hubris, and there's no excuses, and it's not complaining. I'm just explaining what the conditions are. Why am I doing that? Um, Things have changed, and it requires some adjustments. Um, and again, I'm still focusing on being married, having children. I'm still healthy enough for this, and that's part of the purpose as well because perfect balance, man and woman, husband and wife, partnership, supporting each other, a person living on a person's own. If it's a woman living on a woman's own, independently, she's got to do everything herself, essentially. A man living on his own, he's got to do everything himself, essentially. That's a whole lot to do. It's very helpful, very beneficial, very purposeful, and intended for man and woman to work together in perfect balance, partnership, supporting each other, and sharing the role, sharing the duties, sharing the responsibilities, and supporting each other. So I continue to endeavor for that, and I've learned it's a matter of routines merging, coalescing with each other. That's much of what life is our routines, and our relationships emerge from our routines. We build trust through our routines, um, and those are foundational elements for partnership and marriage. And so to meet somebody just off rip, and she's pretty, pretty, and when a woman meets a dude and oh, he's beauty, beauty, whatever, yo, kinfolk can get immersed in that intoxication, that first physical attraction, love at first sight. But the two have yet to know each other's routines yet, and it takes a fair amount of work to get acculturated when routines are different from each other, and it's beneficial to recognize that. So, um, that's life. Positive thing. Well, how about I give a list of some of our guests at our um, open air terrace cafe that we have right here in our midst. You don't see it at this moment. I see it. And so some of our guests, the regulars, who be beautiful, lovely, regulars, the sparrows. Sparrows are amazing. Sparrows, blue jays, woodpeckers, cardinals. Who else been here from the winged kinfolk? I haven't had crows. I'm trying to think. Have we had a singing dove yet? Maybe. I think yeah, once. Maybe not very often. So the singing dove's too good for us. Maybe. Um, haven't had any crows. We've had starlings. It's been a minute. Starlings have their migrations, and when they come, yo, they come in numbers. Even the Blue Jays don't mess with them, which is saying a whole lot. But then the starlings go on their way. The swifts are always here, but they never visit. They just stay above. Um, what else of the winged variety? That's much of it. So of the unwinged variety, well, or in a quasi category, flying squirrels. Flying squirrels are Celebrities. They got charisma, serious, and they jet. Shoo, 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 shoo. When they let themselves be seen and they let themselves be observed, they're saying something. That's that nonverbal communication. Like, yeah, you can look at me now. All right. Yeah. All right. And gone. So flying squirrels are amazing. Today we had the squirrel, the proper squirrel, the big old bear squirrel. When you see a squirrel up close at eye level, those claws look rather large. Um, so respect to the squirrel. When I'm walking around, squirrels look like pipsqueak, little, get out there. But serious, right in front of my face, eye level, them claws is big. So when squirrels are chasing squirrels, that's serious right there. It's bears right there, mini bears. Who else we have? Serious. For the first time ever in the past 3 years since we opened our Terrace Cafe, we have a raccoon. Wow. That I see. A raccoon, to be low key, could have been one of the first guests because we saw droppings that looked like coffee beans. And that's too big for a squirrel. It's not the size for birds, and definitely not the flying squirrels. Like, who is this? They actually look like coffee beans at first. I was like, wait a minute, are the blue jays or one of the birds like sharing this? Like, thanks for the grub. Here's some coffee beans. That seemed a little bit of a stretch, and it actually might have been the droppings of a raccoon. Maybe it was only a few, and it looked like coffee beans. Um, but that was like the first few weeks of sharing stuff, and that was 3 years there, about 3 years ago when I got back from Denmark. Since then, haven't seen, I mean, just the regulars that I mentioned. I can say that in a minute, maybe. But then, just like maybe a couple weeks ago, I'm sitting here about this time, midnight, and then all of a sudden, slowly and strongly, here comes a huge, big old raccoon. If you think the squirrel is big, the raccoon is serious. Just comes down, whoosh, slow, steady, like a cat. The movement is like a cat. Cat like walks on the ledge, checks things out, and there it is. Um, and I stopped. I was walking towards the desk right here, but I stopped because I don't want to scare the raccoon. I don't want to frustrate. The window, part of the window was actually open without the screen. So I know what some of the things raccoons can do when pushed to a certain thing. So I'm being mindful. I just stop and I'm looking. I'm just like observing and admiring the raccoon and seeing what it does. And I'm observing the raccoon again, moves very cat-like, very elegant on the ledge. Very different from how it moves on the ground. When it's on the ground, it's like roly-poly, blip 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 blip, and it looks kind of like silly, like a waddling bear, a mini waddling bear, just like blip 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 blip. Um, and so yeah, not very much impressive. But when it was on here, first of all, it's higher up. It's walking on its limbs, and it's not, it doesn't look timid, but it's just steady and it moves like a cat. Cats move elegant. Come on, come on. Dogs have their own kind of swagger, but cats almost deer-like. And that's how the raccoon was walking, like a cat on the ledge. And that's the first time I see a raccoon walk like that. So big up to the raccoons. Um, through like years ago, see a mousey here. Don't get too many mousey, at least outside. Um, and one of the reasons why we presume that to be is because as formidable as the micey, the itsy bitsy micey species is, in the interior, in scurrying from corners to corners and crevice to crevice, very very quick like. When it comes to climbing things, mice have tremendous jumping ability and can climb certain things to an extent when inside. When it's outside, the mice have a zone, and it's not very much on the ledge, elevated above ground, um, because a few years ago, and this actually even before we began our open air terrace cafe, um, was it? Might have been. Actually, it might have been just as we were doing that. I think I left the window open and the screen, it was down, but there's a way of like jumping through the screen over the other side, which I think the mice know how to do. One of the ways mice get in here through the years. from the other window. So I left it like that, and so the mouse might have come from inside. We got visitation, it seems like right now. Um, Mice might have come from inside and jumped through the window to get to the outside, seeing that there was maybe some rice or something like that on the ledge. But the thing about it is that when I found the mouse there, the mouse was petrified, paralyzed. Usually, when mice are found, they scurry away, but they do so when they're in the interior on the floor, and they can hide in a lot of different places. This mouse was petrified, and there's a water dish out here, and it was just like cowering underneath the water dish and would not move. I lifted up the water dish and it moved to like the crevice, the little corner of the window, and just stayed there. I'm like, I can see you right there. What you doing? And I could tell like it has a little bit of a fear of heights, it seems, and it doesn't have the same climbing ability of walking on the stone like squirrels, like the flying squirrels, and otherwise. And so it shows like, mice have less of a proclivity of delving with the altitude type situations. But we share that as part of the list of the visitors. Haven't observed any rats. Don't have rats too tough here at all. Whenever there is a sighting of rats, usually it's with the dumpster nearby, and it's a situational thing. It's very rare, um, and it tends to be for a short period, and then the rats move on someplace else. To my knowledge, we have a few cats who visit around here, not on the ledge, but in the vicinity. We've had a deer just within the past week on the outside. Very interesting narrative. How about we end with that? Okay, we'll end with that. We'll end with that. We got another story time. All right. Oh, here we go. We'll do this story time. I don't know if I haven't shared this online yet. I might have shared some of it with kinfolk. So we'll wrap it up with story time. Here we go. There we are. Thank you very much. The deer are amazing. That's in our mixed heritage experience. When we talk about clans, we're all part of the Cloud Deer clan. And within the Cloud Deer clan, we have our specific branches. And I'm in the branch of the bison, which is of Northern Europe, because that's where my matrilineal affiliation is. So that's another story. But the point of that is that deer are beautiful, amazing. So here we go, story time. This was just a few weeks ago. It happens to be the approach of Yom Kippur on that particular day. And during the day, I have the occasion, it's a Wednesday, and I have the occasion of being at the library of the local university, doing what I do, and get a little bit prolonged in doing it. And then I become mindful of time. I decided to take the bus back rather than dealing with going uphill, fatigued, and just catch the bus. So, and I'm concerned because it's not yet sundown at that time. It's still daylight, but it's getting to be that time. And this is Yom Kippur. So again, for frame of reference, Yom Kippur within the Jewish path, the path of Israel, it is the day. It is the day in the year, the day, Hayom. It is the day of atonement. It is the day of judgment. It is the day of decision. In the days leading up to that, from Rosh Hashanah, the new year, there's a formal 10-day period. We account for everything we've done in our life, but particularly in doing this year after year, we account for everything we've done in the past year. Anybody we've wronged, any lie we've told, any wrong we've committed, we have to meditate, make sure we got everything, we covered everything, we've atoned for everything, we've made amends, we've made apologies, we've provided remunerations, whatever we've done in this past year, answer proactively. Let's make sure we got our bases covered. It's a serious thing, yeah. High pressure, high stress, serious. If you can imagine being on trial, like I've had that experience, federal felony, 25 years, federal penitentiary. I've had that. I know what that is. It's stress. It's not just stress. it is a spiritual journey, literally. Like life is different when experiencing that, and that's every year. That's Yom Kippur. It's a stressful thing. What have I done? And there's no bullshitting. There's no pretending because the judge is God. God already knows. We're not hiding anything. It's not a matter of being worried about evidence. We have to make sure we cover whatever we can and be honest about it because we're being held. That's Yom Kippur every year. In Jain tradition, there's Paryushan. Within Islam, there is Ramadan. Within Christianity, there is Lent and Holy Week and Easter. So that element exists within our many different traditions, one way or another. So within our faith, we share within each of those that I just mentioned, and we also experience that with Yom Kippur. So that's what I'm experiencing personally at that moment, doing the best I can, knowing I'm not being as observant as I am on previous years as I would like to be, but given everything that's happening, I'm doing what I am able to do at this moment personally. So, meanwhile, I'm at the library and now I'm pushing it because now I'm running late trying to finish things at the library, providing service and otherwise, but then at the risk of arriving and returning to the domicile here to our ashram um, in an untimely manner. Hold on, let me see that in a different way. Being a little bit tardy in my return to this domicile. So a little bit of stress with that. A little bit further amplified, compounded stress. So, but I'm waiting at the bus. What can I do? I experience stress on a regular, so make the best of it as we are. We encounter kinfolk amidst our path in life, and so it's not a matter of imposing that stress upon others, but just to share what we can at that moment with whatever other kinfolk are going through. So that's the scene. I'm in the mindset of thinking of everything I've done this past year in life, all my relationships, family, friends, amidst the disagreements, standing disagreements, and additionally, what have I done, and what do I have to do to make things right at this moment? Where that's the mindset, that's the mentality, that's the consciousness at that moment, and continually, but particularly at that moment. So I'm waiting at the bus stop, and it's nearby. It's not that long away, but I'm waiting at the bus stop. And as I'm waiting at the bus stop, there's a brethren who arrives. The brethren is from Asia, East Asia, presumably. We have a conversation. First, I don't see him holding a device, so I say something. Oh, that's rather provocative. You are walking without a device. I'm saying in a humorous kind of way. Then he goes into his pocket and brings out a device and says, "Oh, the bus should be coming here." Ah, of course. So I make inquiry about him. It seemed to be affiliated. I mean, it's some logical inferences about him being affiliated with the university. He looks a little bit older, so probably graduate studies. The university is emphasis or is um, involved in technology, so it's probably along those lines. And so I make inquiry about something along those lines. So he mentions biological engineering. Aha, okay. So then I ask him a question about, so what's the purpose? So he starts to explain some of what he does specifically within his field of bioengineering, what he's studying. He might have been a PhD. He might be post PhD. I don't want to mean to be like disrespectful, presuming somebody to be a student when they're actually like already in the fold. But he was describing some of what his work is and everything. And I said, what's the purpose? And I'm talking about life itself, biology. Like what the big picture, the big question that puts everything into context. And so we start having a conversation about that, and he's like, "Well, I don't have an answer for that. I think that something along those lines." That's what his response is. And so I said, "Well, if you don't mind, I can share something, a very humble consideration, something I've learned." And he's like, "Sure, fine." And I mentioned a standard kind of, I don't want to say spiel, but a little bit of a thing that I share, which is that, well, the Buddha teaches us that the nature of life is suffering, dukkha, Everybody's suffering one way or the other, regardless of how rich, how nice, whatever. Everybody's suffering one way or the other. It's the nature of life. As long as we're in this life, we're going to experience suffering. Wada. But the flip side of that, so if it's suffering, the nature of life is suffering, why be here? What's the purpose of us being here? So the purpose of life, on the flip side, is healing. As there is suffering, everybody also has a divinely bestowed talent and gift to heal others and oneself in life. And so there's the balance. There's the yin and the yang kind of thing. So I gave I share that kind of consideration. So he seems receptive, and we start to continue the conversation. The bus arrives. So the first things first, get on the bus and account for our fare. Um, and the bus is packed. There are a lot of young people on the bus at that time. It's quitting time. Um, so, but most of the students, most of the young people are at the back of the bus, and there are actually a few free seats towards the front of the bus. And so he sits down on one seat. I sit down on a seat that's facing the aisle. The rows are like this, and then at the front there are the seats that are like facing each other. I sit on the seat here, and he's sitting on the seat that's right adjacent to that. So we're still right in direct proximity with each other. And so we continue our conversation, and we start talking about that. And um, as I'm doing that, I'm sitting and I look across the aisle, and there's an uncle, a brother, maybe a few years older than myself, who looks at me and he acknowledges me. He's like, "What's up?" And I recognize him, and he's initiating and recognizing me, and now I have an onus to respond to, and it's a gift, it's a blessing, to have that. But he's acknowledging me, and so now it's appropriate for me to acknowledge him as well and commensurate and like say, "Oh, how you doing? How's everything going?" It's that type of propriety, if for lack of a better word. So I'm having the conversation with the brethren, but then another brethren acknowledges me, and so I acknowledge him back and say, "How you doing?" Um, and so from that point, there's another brethren who gets onto the bus, and um, the brethren I saw is of African ancestry, and so ethnicity has somewhat of actually it has relevance in this, and it's also shares some of the experience of the intrinsic diplomacy, because regularly have very significant, meaningful, in-depth conversations with people from one moment to another who are very different from each other and who would otherwise very unlikely have zero occasion of actually interacting with each other directly. And so there's a certain amount of um, diplomacy when talking with two kinfolk who are very different from each other. And I'm not any further perfect than anybody else in navigating that, but it has a factor into these conditions. So talking with the one brethren who's of East Asian ancestry, PhD, bioengineering, talk to the other brethren who's of African ancestry, and there's another brethren who's of European ancestry, who arrives onto the bus at the next stop and sits next to the brethren who's of East Asian ancestry. And this brethren who gets on is of European ancestry, beard and otherwise. Um, I actually talked with that brethren too on previous occasions, as I recall. And he and I have a significant conversation on previous occasions. So he sits down next to the brethren who's of East Asian ancestry, maybe one seat behind or whatever. And so then, as I'm talking with the brethren in front of me, um, then there might have been a pause or something like that. And then I asked the brethren in front of me how the Browns are doing. And I'm trying to be diplomatic in um, participating in the different conversations. But as I'm talking with that brethren, then the brethren of East Asian ancestry talks to the brethren of European ancestors because they seem to know each other from before. It's a routine kind of thing. And as that's happening, then I feel less of an onus of continuing the conversation with the brethren at the moment, because he's involved with another kinfolk. So cool. So then I talk with the brethren in front of me and I ask him how the Browns are doing. He has a Browns hat and Browns gear on. So how the Browns doing? We talk about that, and I mentioned, it's been a minute since I think actually asked him a question. Um, there was something I had recently seen, and it was probably a reference to the fumble or the drive or something like that. And I'm trying to remember what specific question, like how I phrased it, but basically it was something along the lines of like, what was the worst moment or what was the best moment? Actually, it was probably the worst moment. Like, what was the most challenging moment, or whatever, in Browns history, like ever? What was like the most difficult thing in Browns history? So, for people who support the Browns for years and years, like yours truly, not so much in the past decade, but since the '80s, like it's pretty much a very kind of standard response. It's either, like I said, um, it's either the fumble. No, it's either the drive that happened before the fumble. It's either the drive or it's the fumble, or people will say Art Modell. And um, peace and blessings be with Art Modell and the Modell family. But it's generally one of those things. The brethren, in response, didn't say any of those. He said something like "red right" or something like that. Now I've heard of that before. I have a general recognition of that, but that's not in my regular frame of reference. And again, this is from supporting the Browns for wow, 40 years at this point. Whoa, the '80s as a young veteran, from an age of 10 thereabouts, middle elementary school. I started following the Browns personally around '85 thereabouts. And so towards the latter part of the '80s, that's when the Browns started becoming like a winning team. But I remember Sipe, Ozzie Newsome, from the old San Bertigliano. That's probably part of like the Browns just as I was getting started. Then in the later '80s, then that's when the Browns started getting successful and started like being known, and that's when the disappointments occur, because the disappointments had Super Bowl implications. The drive was the AFC Championship. The winner of that game goes to the Super Bowl. And the Browns hadn't been to the Super Bowl in 30 years before that. So I guess it's been, well, 20 years. But well, actually, the Browns had never gone to the Super Bowl. What am I talking about? The last time the Browns were in a championship thing was before there was a Super Bowl. So it's been for over 50 years, at whatever Super Bowl it is at this point. The Browns have yet to go. So at that time, it was a big thing. Yo, the Browns are on the verge of going to the Super Bowl. People had songs on the radio. Well, I'm going a whole lot of detail into this segue or whatever, but um, that was a big thing. And then, and the Browns are winning, and it was about to happen. And it was the fourth quarter, and the Browns are ahead, winning the game. And it was the Denver Broncos that time when John Elway, quarterback, and they were on the 1 yard line, 99 yards thereabouts to go to get a touchdown with like very few little time on the clock. Yo, it's insurmountable. The Browns have got this, whatever. And then John Elway and the Denver Broncos lead a charge 99 yards and score a touchdown in like the last seconds of the game. That's the drive. And it's heartbreak, because the Browns live in Cleveland, are from Cleveland. And Cleveland at that time in the '80s was becoming a Rust Belt city where there was a big heyday prosperity, and this is the big city kind of thing. The big city becomes Chicago and stays New York, and becomes Atlanta and Chicago or Houston and San Francisco, in the land of the Ojibwe, the Mohawk, the Oleon, and Apache. So Cleveland was becoming, here in the land of the Haudenosaunee and the Wyandot and the Shawnee, Cleveland was becoming like a joke. It was a joke. The river caught on fire because of pollution. Mayor's hair caught on fire. It was a joke. It was like everybody makes jokes about Cleveland. So here now, Cleveland's about to go to the Super Bowl and become a winner for the first time in a long time. Ain't no sports teams or whatever else, and everybody's joking Cleveland, and factories, all the car factories, manufacturing is leaving, and the economy's on the downturn, and like, yo, here's something to look forward to. And just on the verge of getting to the big dance of the Super Bowl, boom, 99 yards, touchdown, game loss, pain, pain, pain. So, anyways, many people know that. Then, the next year or the year after that, the Browns are still nice, get to the same point, and are like on the verge of going ahead at late in the game, right about to score a touchdown, and instead of scoring a touchdown, fumble the ball. Boom, lose the game. So that's what's referred to as the drive and the fumble. Ernest Biner. Peace and blessings be with Ernest Biner. So those are things that who for a Clevelander who's like a diehard or old school. That's I mean they're cliche at this point. Like people who arrive here, that's the first people thing people learn about the sports. But when actually going, I saw it happen. I was watching TV, glued to the TV as a youngster, watching that happen, shattered after happening. So I know that experience. So when asking people, it's like an easy question. What's the greatest disappointment of the Browns? Whatever. He didn't say either of those. He said Red Right. Red Right, as I understand, is something that happened before my time. Not ancient days, but like in the early 80s. It was against Oakland Raiders, huh? Raiders. And basically it was some kind of play call, whatever. But like I said, I didn't see that myself. I've heard about it. I've learned. I know something about it. But he says that. I was like, oh, interesting to say all that. So we started talking about that, and then we talk about sports. We talk about I mentioned I provide the immediate disclaimer. I haven't watched the Browns game in probably over a decade, so I'm not going to pretend like I know who's been playing or anything else in the past 10, 15 years. But I do know the things before that very, very, very keenly. So we have a conversation, and I mentioned why I haven't watched things because there's been a disappointment. Professional sports provides a lot, but there has been very little return on investment in terms of a community, in terms of villages being established and otherwise. There's some kinfolk that provide charities and this and the other, but when we think about how much has been invested on the part of kinfolk in the hood and the return that kinfolk receive from the hood or in the hood, very little. And so because of that, it's prudent to focus and invest energies in endeavors and in a knowledge of vocation and life interaction and work and service that is further conducive and supportive of healthy community village living. So we start talking about that. And we gave examples, we made names with all respect and love. And so he and I are having this conversation about community upliftment. And as we're having that conversation, there's an auntie, a sister older than myself, sitting a few seats away from him, who's listening quietly as we're having this. He and I are having this conversation. The brethren who is next to me is involved in this conversation with the brethren on from the European brethren. So then the auntie is listening, and eventually she says, "Yeah, but there's no unity." Ah, she just shared gems right there because she speaks. She reveals that she's listening and she invests herself in the conversation. She is deemed the conversation worthy enough for her to share her words and her thoughts. And so, wow, hallelujah, respect, thank you. And I say, well, you know what? There is unity, but we have to find it. And it's not all around. Kinfolk got a lot of different motivations and intentionalities and ambitions or whatever else. But there is a unity. It requires cultivation. It requires investment and otherwise. But it does exist. It might not be completely across the board, everybody buying into it, but it does exist. And so she kind of recognizes that and processes that. And as we're starting to delve into that kind of conversation about unity, what it takes, what it is, how it continues, how to build it, the bus arrives at its next stop, and additional people get on the bus. The bus driver makes an announcement for priority seating for kinfolk arriving on the bus to be provided a seat, and that's my cue to get up and move forward to the bus. So, conversation on hiatus. And that's where things stand at that moment. That's the mindset. As I'm in this moment of Yom Kippur and judgment and what I do in this life, and additionally. So that's some of the conversation that we have. Now I arrive at my stop, and I get off of the bus and onto the sidewalk. Thank you to the bus driver, and I continue on my way. And so that's my mindset at that moment of just thinking community upliftment, particularly in the context of the Black community. But I'm also thinking about existentialism and the bioengineering, the yin and the yang, suffering, dukkha, and tikkun olam is healing of the universe. That complementary nature of life and the characteristics of life. So that's what's in my mind as I'm approaching and checking where the sunshine is and how much time I have left before Yom Kippur actually begins in proper full. So still seemed to be decent. So I'm walking along the sidewalk. Now, as I'm walking along the sidewalk, I see I see in the distance where towards where I live, my domicile, I see a squad car or I see a vehicle stopped on the street on the right lane approaching westbound on the right lane. Um, and it just stopped there. And there's very few other reasons why a vehicle would just be stopped there other than that it's a police squad car because there's no parking, there's no stopping on that side of the street. It's there's always continual traffic. So okay, it's a squad car, but I don't see lights. It doesn't. I don't see warnings of flashing or otherwise. So what's the squad car doing? So, and again, these days squad cars look very similar to other types of vehicles. There's not a lot of very clearly delineated markings from particularly from a distance. It's black color. There's no lights. Why is it stopped right there? Then I see an officer, uniform, walking along the sidewalk along the fence. There's a cemetery right across the street. There's a fence that runs along that line, and so the officer is like kind of looking through the fence on the other side. So the immediate mathematics is that okay, this police officer is looking for somebody who's been involved in some type of crime, and they jump the fence, they're running over there, and the officer's trying to keep an eye view to be able to give directions to somebody else to continue the pursuit. So he's not climbing the fence, but he's kind of keeping an eye of where the perpetrator, may be running towards or whatever else. So I'm like, okay, here we go. We're getting to this element or whatever. So I keep walking. It is what it is. I'm focusing on Yom Kippur and getting back in time. Um, so I'm walking further, and then there's a brethren who's dreaded, got dreadlocks, and he has his phone, and he's filming across the street. He's not. Oh, and I could tell before I got there, he was saying something, yelling out across the street to the police officer. The police officer had made his way back to the squad car at that point, as I'm walking up. And so the brethren with the dreads is standing pretty much right in front of my building and yelling out across the street towards the police officer. And he has his camera going like that. So I'm like, oh, here we go. Something's going on. And the dread brethren is like shouting things at the police officer, presumably in support of whoever is being antagonized, and filming the whole thing, which can go in a number of different directions. So here we go. Now, as I'm approaching, the brethren with the dress kind of looks back towards me towards the sidewalk because he's on the tree lawn. And I say, brethren. He's like, yeah. And I was like, yo, let's focus on village. And he's like, yeah. And he said it too quick. I don't know if it was registering. And I was like, you hear me? No. He's like, yeah. I was like, let's concentrate on something constructive, building village. And he's like, all right, yeah, you're right. And so I could feel like he was like, okay, he's processing it and he's confirming what else do I want. My purpose for saying that was the fact that like instead of like, cause I saw him yelling and I'm thinking, okay, he's doing something that's antagonistic, protesting on the scene, and I'm saying instead of investing um, the energies in that type of methodology of taunting or saying things to the police or whatever, let's invest that energy, that intelligence, um, in something that's constructive of village, that's further secure, long term, intergenerational for the benefit of community. Let's invest our energies in that respect. That's my purpose for saying that. Just very simply, let's focus on village. And he's, yeah. Now, and also it's with the mindset, and I was just writing about this recently, right before that happens, because exactly on this block, just a few doors down, a number of years ago on election day when Obama is reelected, I have the occasion of going to the convenience store. And as I'm going there are some brethren there who are stopped by the police, and they pulled into the parking lot and were being stopped. And it wasn't just a routine thing. Like there was something else. Squad cars came up. Actually, not yet. It was just one police officer by himself. And it didn't seem like the typical thing. I could smell a little bit of herb maybe. So I'm like, oh, brethren are getting stopped and getting like the next degree kind of thing. So I got some stuff, and I might have been, it was on my way back. I had some chips or whatever that I was going to the convenience store for. And as I'm returning from that, Uh, I see the officer, and he was basically the two brethren are in the front and passenger seat, and it's stopped. The engine's off. They look serious. They're just like just solemn faced. But there and that's it. There's an officer, who's at his squad car, whatever, kind of looking in that direction, talking on his radio, and that's pretty much it. So my intention in arriving on that scene, knowing, and this was over 13 years ago, or just about 13 years ago. So this is during a time, as it is even at this moment, where there are heightened concerns or whatever about anybody being stopped, and I've done on previous occasions as well, with similar consequences. But my intention is arriving and just making sure the brethren are okay, they feel like secure, whatever else, and maybe observing from a distance. But I directly intercede in terms of asking the brethren, "You're all right?" And so, I get an okay, and then I continue on my way, and there it is. So when I say, "You all right?" the brethren just kind of look at me and don't say anything. I'm like, "Oh, okay, something's happening here." And maybe they were just salty, maybe they're concerned, or whatever else, but they didn't say nothing. Kind of just gave me like a blank look at me, and look at me blank. Not, and so it was enough for me to say, "Okay, um, I'm going to stay and observe what happens with this." And that's what I do. The police didn't like that. And so then the police started coming at me. Um, and I articulate, I'm just making sure everything's okay, da 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 da. Who are you to do say da da da? And then backup comes. First of all, I didn't do anything until the police officer got his backup so he could feel safer and further secure. And then when the backup arrives, to be honest, it's difficult for me, as I'm recalling here at half past midnight at this point, the details of that. But there was something. Maybe I was standing too close. Maybe I was continuing to. I don't think I was engaging the brethren in terms of conversation, but there was might have been standing too close for the comfort of the police, and there might have been something else, but it wasn't too much. I'm being disciplined. I'm trained in law, and I'm a diplomat of the world religions and otherwise. So I walk with a certain amount of responsibility. Actually, to be honest, I wasn't appointed an ambassador of world religions at that point yet. It was after that. But I was still part of a number of different interfaith organizations, and additionally, including in the Heights. So it's not as though I'm a troublemaker or whatever else. I'm coming with a certain amount of authority, to be honest, as well as discipline and responsibility in the well being of all kinfolk involved. But many people and police are not accustomed to that, trained for that, or interested in that. So, point being, eventually the attention got from the brethren towards myself, um, to the point where I was arrested for whatever pretense was done. Eventually, there was no charge admitted, and I was released a week later after spending the week in lockup. Um, but that was my experience. So when I'm seeing the brethren with dreads like yelling across the street, I'm aware of the inefficiency, the lack of productivity, or the the lack, I'll just say, in that methodology of just yelling or whatever else. So I'm saying, "Yo, let's invest that energy in village." He said, "Yeah, yeah, yeah, okay." Now, when I look across the street, the world changes at that moment. Literally, the world changes. It's like it was in one mode, in one program at that moment, until I looked across the street, and then whoosh, the world immediately changes. Because when I look across the street, it's not somebody getting hemmed up by the police or whatever else. It is a deer whose leg was caught in the spoke of the fence and is hanging upside down right over the sidewalk, suspended in air. And the police officer has the backlights on to warn the oncoming traffic, but doesn't have the overhead lights so as not to upset the deer. And the police is like looking for a way to help the deer, but the police officer, the brethren there, doesn't necessarily have the training for that. That's something for animal wildlife. So he makes that call, and animal wildlife is supposed to be on its way. Meanwhile, here's this deer hanging upside down with its leg. I'll say her leg. It was a a young doe, maybe a year or two old. It's comparatively small, but still young adult. Um, she's hanging upside down with her leg caught on the fence. How you do that? What's going on? But not mood for conversation at that point. So now, oh, here we are, Yom Kippur. The sun is being covered up by the horizon. What you gonna do? What's it? What it is? So, yo, it's life. So I have a loaf of bread, half a loaf of bread that I had from lunch. So I go over to the across the street and I communicate to the officer. I'm just gonna offer this deer some bread to help calm the deer down, regardless of what's happening. Because every time the officer would come by, the deer would like lunge, and go raw. And so I'm just trying to calm the deer down. And the police officer from the Gidea was just very conducive or congenial, and just like, um, matter of fact. But I can't presume that as a given, because I've had similar attentions on previous occasions, and police officers respond in a very different way. So first, I want to make sure that things are copacetic between myself and the officer, so that I can help in whatever's going on with the deer. So I said, I have the bread. I'm saying we're just gonna have help the deer out. He's like, yo, cool. And so I mentioned, maybe at least I don't anticipate the deer actually having that, because who has a meal when they're hanging upside down from a fence with their leg punctured? So, but at the very least, it might help calm the deer down. So I offer it, and then again, the deer, when I'm approaching, goes, "Rah!" And then, but it calms down a little bit. I get a close up a little bit, to offer the deer. The deer doesn't seem very interested, much, and I'm very interested in my fingers, as I mentioned to the officer, and I know, a deer can go snappity snap very easily. So I'm keeping a safe distance whilst I'm still offering by hand this loaf of bread. It's a home cooked loaf of bread, I might say. Um, so when the deer doesn't immediately take it, I set it on the ground next to the deer. Now the deer can't reach the ground at that point. It's still suspended, but I just keep it there, just so, again, help with like calming or whatever else. So then, seeing the situation, I'm like, okay, yo, like I'm being mindful of just approaching, because that deer can flay in a number of different directions. And again, a chop, my fingers are, oh, so dainty. I won't say dainty. They're very delicate. I'll say that, particularly compared to the bone of a deer tooth. So, chompity chomp, and that can happen very quick. I'm not going to sleep on that. So I'm being mindful of how much experience do I have of removing a deer from a fence. Um, but I'm here to do what I can. The officer, and at that point, I go from the deer and I go to the officer and talk with the officer. Officer talks about, animal control being called. I guess it's not called wildlife. I guess that's like a state, federal type of thing. But anyways, animal control, municipal animal control being called and on its way. And but if that's the situation, don't know what the end scenario is going to be. If animal control, that might just be euthanasia at that point. So, well, maybe we can find another solution before it gets to that point. But yo, what am I do? So I look at the situation. I'm saying, oh, how would we do this? How could we free the deer from that predicament? And it would require lifting the deer up, because if you lift the leg up, it still has to come with the weight of the whole deer in order to lift the leg up. And at that angle, the deer was on this side, and it would be difficult to get to the leg without the deer flailing. It would be easier to get onto the other side of the fence and lift the leg from the other side of the fence. Um, who's gonna climb the fence to do that? Look at me. I got my back situation, whatever. So we kind of just stand there. Now, as we're standing there, here comes one of those good old boys. I'm trying to do a rendering of the Dukes of Hazzard kind of sound. Just the good old boys, never causing no harm. Dum but the bum but the dum. Anyways, there's a brethren who comes up in his pickup truck and stops on the other side of the street. Might have put on his hazards, and comes up and says, "Yo, what's going on?" And he talks to the officer too, and gives some kind of credentials or whatever to inform the officer of him intending well-being in these circumstances. And so he has on his work gloves. He comes prepared, and so he kind of looks at things or whatever, and just takes the initiative. And at that point, I mean, he acknowledges us. The brother of Dreads came up at that point as well. But he seems to have less experience in these kind of situations too, so he's just kind of observing and supporting from that point. And the brethren with the good old boy from the pickup truck with the gloves on. He kind of looks around, says what's up to everybody, and is that all right? And so what the beautiful thing about it is that he and I don't even say anything specifically like, okay, I'm gonna do this, you do this, and the other. I already took the initiative of approaching it this way in my own way, what I can do. And we commented as he arrived on like what we see the situation is and everything else like that. But we didn't say, okay, I'm gonna do this, you do that, I'm gonna do this. It wasn't any of that. Instead, what he does is he on his own goes up to the deer with his gloves and he gets around the deer flailing or whatever. So presumably he has some experience in dealing with deer. And he grabs the deer and then he lifts up the deer on his own. And knowing that that probably is not sufficient in and of itself, but he initiates it without saying anything, without coordinating or presuming anybody to work on it. But when I see him doing that, I'm like, oh, okay, here we go, let's roll. So as he's lifting up the deer and he's got the deer, I'm like, okay, let me grab the leg. So I walk around the deer and he has the deer hold, so I don't have to worry too much about the deer flailing and chomping off my fingers. So I grab the deer's leg and I lift it up off the spoke of the fence. And there we are. The deer is free. So then I let the leg go. He lets the deer go, and the deer kind of flops onto the sidewalk and scrambles back. And he's like, "Be careful! Don't get caught with the kick or anything." So then I will move back, and I catch a little shiner right here. Oh, I got the scar face right there, because that was the tree being like whoosh. But I moved out the way as for the deer. First, the deer ran actually in that direction, and it was like, no, no, no. And then turned away and went in the other direction where I was standing. So I'm like, oh, let me get the way. So when I got the way, I got the tree branch, and then the deer goes running the other way. And in that direction, there's woods a little bit, a few blocks away, and there's further open spaces for the deer to go. I've seen deer in that vicinity before. And initially, before the deer got beyond view, the deer stopped still at the other side of the cemetery by the fence, and then tried to jump over the fence back into the cemetery because it's open space. Very logical. It's quiet there, fewer people, and a lot of grass. And I was like, "Yo, we just did this, yeah. Like, why go through this again?" And so it kind of the deer, she kind of just kept running off into the direction of the woods. So that's the story. And then the brethren, the good old brethren, like, boom, boom, that's it. And I make my way because I got thing to do. Um, and come back here for Yom Kippur. Now, after I was across the street and got back to the dome, I was like, hold up, let me say something to the polite police officer because we were able to do something congenial and cooperatively. So I went back to say thanks. And additionally, and as I'm doing that, haha, the police officer was actually on this side of the street where my domicile is, and the brethren with the pickup truck continues on his way. So he's bounced. He said his thanks, and we pounded each other. We dapped and went our ways. So he's gone, and then he's continuing on his way, and then I went to the building. I'm like, hold up, let me say peace and blessings to the officer, and to the brethren dread. And as I go back, the two of them are actually on this side of the street, had crossed onto this side of the street and are talking with each other, just like, yo, that was trippy, da 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 da. So I arrive up and I dap up, or I think we pounded. The officer like thanks for provision. He said thanks to me for helping out, and went to the brethren dread, said thanks. He says thanks, boom, and we continue on our way. So that's the story. And the thing is, what do I mean by the world changed? Like things changed because up to that moment that I was talking with the Brethren Dread and saying, yo, village, my mindset and my presumption was a certain situation, my actuality that I need us to continue to be ready for. And additionally, and I've been conditioned to be trained for and ready for, is that of a certain static kind of experience. But when I actually looked across the street, it was something completely different. And it's just a matter, it wasn't just a matter of, oh, I thought it was going to be this. It was a matter of literally like the world changed at that moment. And one of the reasons why I say that is because the purpose for me saying what I say to the Brethren Dread about Village, it wasn't a matter of hatred. It wasn't a matter of antagonism of F the police or anything else like that. It was something of love and constructive and peace and discipline and coming actually from an experience of pain and affliction and learning lessons from that and then sharing that in a dutiful, even spiritual way. And literally because of that, as much as I know, because I say that in such a way, boom, 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 the world changes. And instead, that's not the situation. It's not somebody getting hemmed up, per se, by the police and everything else like that. It's actually a different scenario of cooperation for a greater cause. The world literally changed, particularly from the Kavanaugh, particularly from the intention and the concentration of working for a greater purpose, for a greater well being of all kinfolk. And again, that's my spirituality. That's the path I'm walking on, particularly at that moment as I'm preparing for Yom Kippur. Now, that's that in and of itself, but it's also beneficial to recognize as part of the story that much of the narrative, the liturgy within the services of Yom Kippur are sacrifice and offering. The first part of it from Rosh Hashanah is the birth of Yitzhak in a miraculous way when Abraham Avinu and Sarah Imenu are of advanced years in probability of having children. A child is bestowed, and it's a sacred, precious thing. Any time a child is born, sacred and precious, and particularly when a husband and wife are of advanced years of an age and experience in life, and having doubts about being able to have children, and additionally, and here a child is bestowed, so it's miraculous. It's a blessing. Hallelujah. Baruch Hashem Hamdulillah. That's part of the narrative in the liturgy. But then even further, after the birth of Yitzhak, Yitzhak Avinu, Avraham Avinu is called to sacrifice him, to kill him, to offer him to God. And he prepares to do that. But at the last minute, instead of actually, he gets with his servants, he brings the utensils, he tells his son to accompany him without telling him everything specifically, explicitly, and then going to the wilderness, onto the hillside, and then eventually strapping his son up and preparing to lower the knife and kill his own son, the miracle, who was born onto him at his late advanced age, killing him because that's what God commands him to do. But at the last minute, he's told to stop and not to sacrifice his son. And instead of killing and offering his son, there is a ram that is caught in the thicket with its horns, and to offer the ram instead, which is actually what Abraham Avinu articulates from the beginning as a diversion to his son. That is the liturgy, offering, sacrifice, as a mindfulness of atonement and a purpose greater than oneself. That is what is continually shared, invoked, emphasized during the High Holy Days within the tradition of Israel every year. And at that time that I was walking along the sidewalk, a distinguishing factor in this story, in this narrative, is that the deer is caught on a fence. But rather than sacrificing the deer is freed. Life. That's one of the commands from Moshe Rabbeinu. I have set before you the commandments to be in relationship with God. That is life. Violating these commandments, these mitzvot, that is death. Temptation, delusion, straying from path, that's death. So you have a choice. You can choose life or you can choose death. And in this experience on the eve of Yom Kippur, there is a deer caught in the thicket of the fence, leaping from a cemetery, a Jewish cemetery, and being caught on the fence. And we are able to work together, the dread good old boy, police, and whatever I am, together to free the deer and continue in life, avoiding animal control and the coyotes as much as possible. So that's some of the experience of Yom Kippur this year, this past year. That's what we have to share. We give all thanks and praise to the Most High Elohim, known by many names and beyond all names. Rastafari, all our relations, blessed love and peace.